a tank of gas in my truck and $200 in my bank. In my wallet, 22 in cash. Volcano swelling the Seagulls shrieking last-bys. I saw my creator at the center of the expanse and collapse. All of time flowed inward and outward, and clocks pulled at strings, spaghettifying pearls in the silver and gray, each heartbeat declaring why. Each heartbeat declaring why. Each heartbeat declaring why. The tonsils of time, seismic shaking, I'd be torn apart without grace. You reveal yourself always. I have everything I need. Matter, and direction, and sight. God, I am in your trinity. Yet I am not dying. Yet I am not grasping. Yet and so and onwards, and still there's half a tank of gas in my truck and $200 in my bank. In my wallet, 22 in cash. Volcanoes swell the air, seagulls shrieking last-bys. I saw my creator at the center of the expanse and collapse. All of time flowed inward and outward, and clocks pulled at strings, spaghettifying pearls in the silver and gray. Each heartbeat declaring why. Each heartbeat declaring why. Each heartbeat declaring why. Each heartbeat declaring why. The tonsils of time, seismic shaking, I'd be torn apart without grace. You reveal yourself always. I have everything I need. Matter and direction and sight. God, I am in your trinity. Yet I am not dying. Yet I am not grasping. Yet and so and onwards and still. Amen.
Hey, welcome back to Burning Bushes. I'm Daniel J. Newman, and this stream is a special one. It's called Evolution, Evil's Resolution. We're going to be reading from Seraphim Rose, but also looking at some other articles. And this is a fascinating thing for me, to look at evolution in a different light and see its philosophical implications and just have our mind blown a little bit. You know, I think a lot of us were educated a certain way. I know I was. I was taught to believe that the earth is very old and that animals evolve. And I used to believe, well, that must be part of God's plan, whatever. I was okay with that. It didn't shake my faith at all to believe in evolution. But now that I'm starting to see that evolution was actually a lie, it makes a lot of sense. And that's what this stream is trying to get to the bottom of. Evil's resolution, I say, as a question. Well, let's think about it. Evolution tells us that there is no God, that things happen by chance. You see, during the Age of Enlightenment, everybody tried to get rid of the supernatural. They abandoned tradition and started thinking everything can be explained because that's a way to control the world. If everything was materialism, then you could build a smart enough computer, conceivably, or do enough calculations that you'd be able to predict anything. That would be ultimate control. So that was the dream of materialism, is to fully understand the world so that we could be in control of it. But there's a problem because the natural world is created. And so there is an assumption, in fact, it's inherent, that there has to be a creator. So they couldn't just say that there's no creator because that doesn't make any logical sense. There has to be a cause for the natural world. It's everything in our natural world has a cause and effect. So it needs to have some kind of cause. So they had to change the creator from being God to being more like chance. Things happen that way, But it flies in the face of what we know as entropy. Entropy tells us that as time moves on, things will become more and more disordered and chaotic. And if we look at the Bible, that's exactly what it tells us is going to happen. We actually fell from grace. It's not that we're getting more evolved in time. And if you look around, I think you can feel it in your bones. We're not more evolved than our ancestors. As much as that makes us want to feel special and it piques our narcissistic tendencies to think, I'm smarter than my ancestors. I know better than they do. Well, that's exactly what Descartes said. He said, let's forget everything that's been told to us, and we're going to start afresh because we're smarter than those dummies in the past. What do they know? This happens in the Bible a lot. You see it in the Psalms where David is talking about the people who forget. They forget God's great wonders and mercies and his miracles, and because it's been too much time. And they don't rely on what their parents have told them. They don't rely on their elders that said, oh, God has done great things for us. He parted the Red Sea. You say, well, that doesn't make any sense. I've never seen the Red Sea part. And so what happens is if you stop trusting in tradition and you start relying on yourself, we have evil. We have evil because in the evolutionary worldview, might makes right. And political systems can become more evolved. I remember watching Star Trek when I was a kid and watching First Contact. It's a movie with the Borg. If you haven't seen it, I don't want to bore you with it, but there's one part in the movie where there's somebody from the past. They time travel in this movie, and she's from the 22nd century. And she says, how did you guys afford all this stuff in your ship? And Picard, with like a little smirk, a little bit of pride comes through, and he says, oh, we've evolved beyond money in the 24th century. We've evolved beyond it. Yeah. Well, the thing is, we've never seen anything evolve. Not even once. Never has there been a time or any kind of evidence that shows that a species has evolved into another species. Yeah, a species can adapt. That's true. But if you look at the fossil records, you'll find that a lot of the same species that we have today were there in the past. But how far back in the past can that really be? We have a lot of questions that we can answer. But I'll tell you this much, from looking at it just a little bit, there has been a history of fake news, misinformation about evolution from the embryo drawings to make us look like we go through phases of evolution when we're in the womb, which proved to be false. Things like horses, where they found out that these fossils were actually found to be at the same date as the other horse bones, where they thought that was a missing link. The Neanderthal was originally supposed to be a missing link, but now it's considered a hominid species. And the list goes on and on. I mean, there's birds that they said, oh, the birds came from the reptiles, and they thought they had something. They thought they had this missing link. And then they found out, 65 billion years ago, there was birds. So I guess the birds have always been around. Go figure. There's a lot to get into. But before I do, let me take a look at the chat, because I don't want to neglect you guys out there. You might have some questions or comments. Gangster Ghost says hi. Hey, Gangster Ghost. How you doing, buddy? Daryl says, enjoy the stream, bro. It'll be late for me. Yeah, these are these late Thursday streams. Daniel Barry says, happy Thursday. What's up, guys? No says, hi, Gigi and Daryl in the chat. And hi, Daniel. Hey, No. Proverbs Guys is here. He says, howdy. Howdy out there. I think you're really going to enjoy this episode. And peace, love, and grace from Odine. All right. Looks like you guys are doing great out there, which is awesome. But not everybody's doing great. Because there's grief in the world. And I know this is a little bit off topic, but because of so many deaths lately, and I've just been informed that there's an anniversary of a YouTuber who died, but also I know my own godparents' parents just passed away. We're going to do, just quickly, a prayers for the departed. I hope this doesn't offend anybody. The reason why we do it as Orthodox, we don't know exactly what God does with that grace, but we believe that we should always pray for each other. And God knows what to do with it. So if somebody that we pray for that is departed is already in heaven, then they don't need that grace, but God knows what to do with it. And what he wants from us is our love. So we do this out of love. It helps also with the people grieving. So let's do that first. Then we'll read an article. Excuse me. We'll read an article and then get into Seraphim Rose. Oh, let me know in the chat if you'd like me to add anyone to this prayer. So maybe I'll give you guys a little bit of time. Write in the chat anybody who has passed away that you would like me to pray for. And we can pray for them together. So I will actually hold off on that prayer because you guys might have somebody in mind. So let's go here first. Soft tissue blood vessels and dinosaur fossils. The last uncontested dinosaur fossil is found in the Cretaceous period of the geologic column, below the KPG boundary, that marks a mysterious extinction event that wiped out some 70,000% of the planet's species. The dinosaur era extends from roughly 252 million years ago to the KPG boundary, roughly 65 to 66 million years ago according to the evolutionary timescale. Obviously, no flesh could conceivably survive 100,000 years without decay, much less 1 million, and much less 65 million, and much less 200 million. As of 2005, however, many dinosaur fossils have been cracked open and studied, only to find collagen and blood vessels with red blood cells still intact, original proteins, and soft, stretchy, flexible tissue. The list has grown to include T-Rexes, Hadrosaurs, Mosasaur, Triceratops, Thessalosauros, Psittacosaurus, Archaeopteryx, and Sizomorph fossils. I'm mispronouncing all of these. While certain sterile conditions could conceivably preserve organic remains for hundreds or thousands of years, The fossils being studied were not discovered in sterile laboratory environments, but rather harsh environments like the Midwestern U.S., with large temperature differentials, erratic weather, and climate conditions that accelerate the decay. No reasonable explanation has been offered, and yet the evidence has continued to mount. The most plausible explanation is that the geologic strata that host the dinosaurs do not date to 66 million years ago, but rather to a few thousand years ago. If the rock layers of geologic column represent millions of years of slow accumulation, lithification, and erosion, one would expect the layers beneath the surface layer to be brittle, as rock layers are today. Plate movement would therefore result in the fracturing of those rock layers rather than bending them. Rocks do not bend, but rather they break. In several places of the Earth, however, rock layers have been discovered that are bent and folded at radical angles without any fracturing. For example, there's the Tapete sandstone and the Mauve limestone of the Great Canyon. These thick layers of sediment that eventually lithified represent millions of years of time conventionally, must have been laid down rapidly and had not yet enough time to lithify before being bent to the rapid plate movement predicted to occur during the flood. An old Earth evolutionary dating technique relies on the uniformitarian assumption. Whatever processes we witness occurring today must be used to explain the past. If petrifying a tree, forming oil, carving a canyon, transforming the parent isotopes of a radioactive rock into their daughter elements, or moving a continent several miles would take millions of years at the lithification, transformation, erosion, decay, and drift rates we see today, then the Earth must be at least millions of years old. If, however, each of these processes are shown to occur rapidly under catastrophic conditions, then these processes cannot be used to prove an old Earth. Sure enough, as creationists have predicted would be the case, each of these processes have been empirically verified as occurring rapidly under catastrophic conditions, like those of the biblical flood of Noah. Petrification has been found to be able to occur in mere months to a few years under catastrophic conditions. Oil has been shown to form in hundreds of thousands of years. Oil has been shown to form in hundreds to thousands of years. The rapid carving of canyons has been verified to occur under catastrophic conditions. Studies have verified that nuclear decay rates of radioactive materials can be accelerated under catastrophic conditions, and evidence for the rapid movement in the past of the plates upon which the continents reside has been verified as well. Each of the chronometers that are said to prove old ages of the Earth is contradicted by the evidence. Ocean water is salty. Each year, hundreds of millions of tons of sodium are added to the oceans, and only 27% of it is removed by other processes, leaving an annual accumulation of 336 million tons of sodium. Starting with a zero sodium content in the sea, and using the old Earth assumption of uniformitarianism, the current concentration of sodium in the ocean would be reached in only 42 million years. According to the U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, however, the ocean is supposed to be 3.8 billion years old. The response to this fact, as must be the case in other examples on this list, would obviously be that the accumulation or the dissemination rates must have been different in the past. The average salt accumulation, however, would have to be over 90 times slower than present rates in order to accommodate the alleged age of the ocean. This conjecture simply does not hold up under any scrutiny, and even if it did, it would merely prove the creationist contention that uniformitarianism is not a reliable assumption. Present processes are not the key to understanding the past, and therefore no old age dating technique can be trusted, since they all rely on the concept of uniformitarity. Since the flood happened, catastrophicism, rather than uniformitarianism, is a more reasonable assumption. Intimately tied to catastrophe are rapid processes and therefore young ages. As water and wind scour the continents each year, 20 billion tons of material is estimated to be deposited into the oceans. As the tectonic plates of the Earth move, subduction occurs, with one plate slowly diving under another towards the mantle. 1 billion tons of material is estimated to be removed from the seafloor each year from that process, leaving 19 billion tons of sediment accumulating each year on the ocean floor. On average, the sediment thickness on the ocean floor is about 1,500 feet. Based on the current date of sediment deposition, the sediment of the ocean floor would accumulate in only a small fraction of the alleged 3.8 billion years of the ocean. The average annual sediment accumulation would have to be 197 times smaller to match an ocean age of 3.8 billion years. The amount of sediment on the seafloor simply does not support a billions of years old ocean, but it does fit well with the young Earth, when the accelerated erosion rates during and immediately after the flood are accounted for. When making a multi-layer cake, the adjoining surface between layers is smooth. If you made your cake outside over several weeks, waiting several days between new layers and leaving the cake open to the elements in the meantime, the surface of each layer would exhibit the indicators of time: decay, loss of cake from scavengers, erosion from rainwater, etc. Similarly, if geologic strata are formed over millions of years, the surface between adjoining layers would not be smooth, but would exhibit proof of time passing in the form of, for instance, erosional and depositional surfaces. However, the layers are by and large smooth, indicating rapid deposition without enough time for erosion to happen. Those surfaces which now show evidence of erosion match the type of erosion that would be predicted if the lower surface had not yet lithified when a rapid erosion event occurred above the surface, prior to the further rapid deposition. The bottom line is the Grand Canyon exhibits evidence of a young Earth. Here's an interesting one: helium and zircon crystals. Zircon crystals are considered to be some of the oldest minerals on Earth, thought to be billions of years old. They are very hard and resistant to deterioration, and they're able to preserve their contents well, making them safer from contamination. Within the zircon crystals, a portion of the zirconium atoms are replaced by uranium while the crystals glow. As a reactive uranium-238 decays into its daughter elements lead-206, alpha particles are released that combine with nearby electrons. Helium is subsequently formed, which can then be detected in the zircon crystals. While zircon crystals are able to preserve their contents well, helium is known to behave as a slippery material. Helium atoms are small and are in constant motion because they're gas particles. They are therefore hard to contain, and they diffuse very quickly. Upon examination of zircon crystals that are thought to be 1.5 billion years old, however, scientists have discovered the presence of unusually high concentrations of helium. If the crystals were billions of years old, the helium should have been diffused from the crystals and released into the atmosphere, since high concentrations of helium can only be sustained theoretically for a few thousand years without significant diffusion. The presence of high concentrations of helium illustrates the fact that at some points in the relatively recent past, the nuclear decay rate of uranium-238 was accelerated, producing larger amounts of helium that have not yet had time to diffuse. If radioactive decay rates were accelerated at some point in the past, like during the flood, then radioactive materials will appear deceptively old, while actually being relatively young. So this is an interesting one because we've all had a balloon with helium in it before, and we know that after like maybe 3-5 days, it starts to lower to the ground. It's because the helium is escaping from the balloon. It's got a plastic shell, but it can get through the plastic. Zircon crystals, on the other hand, are extremely hard. But even then, they're not going to be able to hold helium for 1.5 billion years. 1.5 billion years is an inconceivable amount of time for the human mind. Truly, truly large timescales. As a radioactive atom of uranium decays into polonium within a solid crystalline material, alpha particles are released and halos form, marking the different stages of nuclear decay. Parentless radiohalos, however, are found in many granitic rocks, implying accelerated nuclear decay in the past and a young age for the Earth. Here's some astronomy stuff. As the hydrogen within the sun fuses into helium, the sun gradually increases in temperature. Calculations show that at current rates, 3.5 billion years ago, the sun would have been 25% dimmer and would have heated the Earth less, dropping Earth's temperature to some 31 degrees Fahrenheit. Earth would have been below freezing. According to contemporary thinking, however, Earth initially molten was hotter, not colder, prior to 3.5 billion years ago, and it was gradually cooling, not heating up. Not only is there no evidence that the Earth was ever frozen, but if it had been frozen 3.5 billion years ago and beyond, according to evolutionists, life could not emerge 3.5 to 4 billion years ago, since life relies on liquid water. We got one about the magnetic decay, but I have some thoughts on that because might get into it, might not. Here's another one. Spiral galaxies. Earth is located in the Milky Way galaxy, which is a spiral galaxy. According to the Big Bang model, galaxies began forming within 1 billion years after the Big Bang, making many of them over 12 billion years old. Of all the galaxies that scientists have observed, some 77% of them are spiral galaxies. The oldest spiral galaxy is thought to be about 11 billion years old. If you have ever sprinkled cinnamon on a hot foamy drink and then stirred the drink with a straw or stick, you will notice the formation of the characteristic spiral galaxy shape. You may also notice that the portion of the spiral that is closer to the center rotates faster than the portion of the spiral that is closest to the edge of the cup. That differential rotation causes the arms of the spiral to begin blurring closer to the center of the spiral over time. After a few rotations, the center of the spiral is no longer recognizable. Similarly, spiral galaxies are spinning slowly. If spiral galaxies are as old as is claimed by secular cosmologists, after a few 100 million years, the arms of the spirals should no longer be recognizable, and yet many of them still are. Space.com admits the exact mechanism for the formation of the spiral arms continues to puzzle scientists. If they were permanent features of the galaxy, they would soon wind up tightly and disappear, and then in less than 1 billion years. Apparently, the observational evidence does not harmonize with the deep time proposition of the Big Bang model. And this is the last one, which I think is really neat. I haven't seen this one before. The solar system is composed of hundreds of thousands of objects that are orbiting the sun. Over 3,000 of these objects are known as comets. Comets are balls of ice and dirt moving through space in elliptical orbits around the sun. They are believed to be leftovers from the material that initially formed the solar system about 4.6 billion years ago. As comets in their orbit move close to the sun, solar winds and radiation from the sun blow material from the comet, creating the characteristic tail we observe. Since material is removed from a comet with each cycle around the sun, obviously the comet will eventually disintegrate, completely sublimating. The typical lifespan of a comet, according to scientists, is 10,000 years. How, then, can the solar system be 4.6 billion years old if thousands of comets thought to have formed when the solar system formed are still orbiting the sun? Scientists speculate the existence of a source for new comets that lies outside of the solar system, but no observational evidence has ever substantiated this claim. The Bible model, the Bible, of course, provides a plausible explanation that harmonizes with the evidence. The solar system is indeed less than 10,000 years old. All right, so that's a little warm-up. So let's see in the chat if anybody wanted me to add some names. So Curse Zero says, religion is for those who quit their journey of comprehension. Stop trying to state science is incorrect. But you can't because you have the desire to have conflict instead of comprehending. Well, here's the thing, Curse Zero. Good science doesn't start with a theory and cram all the evidence to try to shape it. I mean, that's what's been happening. There's been a presupposition of evolution, and people keep using the evidence and trying to make it make sense. Unfortunately, what people have found throughout history, ever since this evolutionary theory came out in 1859, I think, is that it doesn't work. They keep being proven wrong over and over and over and over and over again. And yet they don't change their assumption. That's not good science. That's called dogma. You're believing in a faith. You have to believe this stuff. The evidence does not point to it at all. Curse Zero says, just as beings that thrive from fear do, they attempt to destroy what they refuse to understand because they fear it. Oh, and don't waste your time because I already left, as I know you're going to respond to my message. Do you want me to be correct or do you want me to be intelligent? All right, Curse Zero. Well, glad you showed up for a little bit. Richard says, Jesus Christ upholds all things by the power of his word. Tell you what scares away people like Curse Zero, the facts. The evidence against evolution. Odin says, bro, what are you reading? Whomever wrote it seems like they don't even know what they're talking about. Evolution has nothing to do with cosmology. This isn't about evolution. This is about young Earth versus old Earth. Yeah, Odin, you misunderstood. So we're going to be talking about evolution and young Earth creationism because they're both related. Evolution can only work on large time scales. So once you get rid of, you can go from either side. I started with realizing that evolution wasn't true and then going to young Earth. It's actually probably easier to understand that this Earth cannot be that old. The dating techniques that they're using are been shown scientifically not to work very well. There's always contamination. For example, like carbon-14. They always are able to find carbon-14, no matter how old the thing is. Carbon-14 is supposed to decay, and that carbon-14 dating is like what you use. But they always can find some form of carbon-14 left over. Carbon-14 is, what is its half-life? I think 6,000 something years. Carbon-14 half-life. Yeah, it's about a little less than 6,000 years. 5,730 years. That's how long carbon-14 is supposed to be able to last. And yet they find it in all the fossils. Now, that could just be contamination. However, if there is contamination, then you can't use the dating style anymore. This is the issue. It breaks down on many layers. But I don't see anybody in the chat adding names. So we're just going to do quickly prayers for the departed, and then we're going to get into Seraphim Rose. With the spirits of the righteous made perfect, give rest, O Savior, to the souls of your servants, keeping them in a blessed life with you, O lover of mankind. In blessed repose, where all your saints find peace, give rest, O Lord, to the souls of your servants, for you alone are immortal. Glory to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit. You are our God, who descended into hell, and released the bonds of those held fast in anguish. Give rest, O Savior, to the souls of your servants, both now and forever, and to the ages of ages. Amen. O only pure and spotless Virgin, who bore God without seed, intercede for the salvation of the souls of your servants. With the saints give rest, O Christ, to the souls of your servants, where there is neither pain nor sorrow, nor sighing, but life everlasting. Remember, O Lord, our fathers and brethren who have fallen asleep, in the hope of resurrection unto everlasting life, and all who have died in piety and faith, and pardon them every sin they have committed, willingly or unwillingly, in word or deed or thought. Settle them in a place of light, a place of refreshment, a place of repose, whence pain, grief, and sighing have fled away, and where the light of your countenance gives gladness to all your saints throughout the ages. Grant them and us your kingdom, participation in your ineffable blessings, and the enjoyment of your endless and blessed life. For you are the life, the resurrection, and the repose of your sleeping servants, O Christ our God, and to you we give glory together with your eternal Father, and your all-holy, good, and life-giving Spirit, now and forever, into the ages of ages. Amen. Remember, O Lord, for you are good, your servants, Joseph, Joanne, Chet, Manny, Joshua, Jeremy, Justin, Aaron, Martin. Go and forgive them all the sins they have committed in life, for you alone are without sin, and you alone are able to give rest to the departed. Memory eternal, memory eternal, memory eternal. And may their souls dwell with the blessed. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. All right, let's figure out what's really up with Seraphim Rose. Now, if you didn't know, Seraphim Rose is Orthodox, blessed memory. He's being currently canonized as a saint. You might actually see his icon there, but let me show you a little closer. He's in the process of canonization, but with Orthodoxy, that's how it is. Sometimes we make we always make icons before they get canonized. People recognize saints before. It takes a long process for the church, but eventually he's already been canonized by I think Rocor in Georgia or something. I'm not sure yet when he's going to be canonized in the OCA, but that icon was blessed. So let's get into it. Let's pull out some of his words here. Because the thing about evolution is it affects everything. Evolution has always been about us, about what we want to believe. If you want to believe that there is no God, that there's no moral accountability, evolution is your sauce that you're going to want to put on all your steaks and all your burgers. But let me tell you something. It's fake news. The good news is the gospel. The fake news is telling you that this earth has been around for a very long time and we just evolved from weird fish creatures. No, that's not the case. And if it was possible that evolution was the case, then we'd be seeing it happening. It's not like it would just stop all of a sudden. No, there's just a time when peptides and proteins just kind of got together and they created the most complicated thing ever known as DNA, which scientists still don't fully understand. But they want to use it. They want to use it for computing because they're like, wow, this is like amazing. Whoever designed DNA? And why is it found in the most primitive organisms? Primitive. They find the oldest stuff and, it's still got DNA. Go figure. When did that start? All right. With that caveat. J.H. Randall Jr., who himself is an evolutionist, is sophisticated enough to admit that the theory of evolution is a faith, not a proven fact. Eat your heart out there, people who think this is just science. At present, biologists admit that we do not, strictly speaking, know anything about the causes of the origins of new species. We must fall back upon the scientific faith that they occur because of chemical changes in the germplasm. Evolutionists must fall back upon this faith because, as they say, anything else is unthinkable. The anything else being that God created the world 7,000 or 8,000 years ago. Randall continues, describing the effect of evolution on the world. In spite of these difficulties, the beliefs of men today have become thoroughly permeated with the concept of evolution. The great underlying notions and concepts that meant so much to the 18th century, nature and reason and utility, have largely given way to a new set better expressing the ultimate intellectual ideas of the growing world. Many social factors conspire to popularize the idea of development and its corollaries. Perhaps the fundamental emphasis brought by evolution into men's minds has been upon the detailed causal analysis of the specific processes of change. Instead of seeking to discover the end or purpose of the world process as a whole, or to discern the ultimate cause or ground of all existent things, the fundamental task of earlier science and philosophy, I might add, men have come to examine just what the process is and just what it does in its parts. They have rejected the contemplation of a fixed and static structure of truth and adopted instead the aim of investigating all the little truths which experimentation can reveal. Not that truth which is the source of all truths, lifting man's soul above all human experiences to the realm of the eternal, but the patient, tireless, and endless search after an infinity of finite truths in our experience. This is the present-day goal of all scientific and philosophical endeavor. Randall mentions how the changing human institutions, the different ideas of morality, enforce one's faith in evolution. The conception of man as an organism reacting to and acting upon a complex environment is now basic. All ideas and institutions today thought of as primarily social products functioning. All ideas and institutions are today thought of as primarily social products, functioning in social groups and springing from the necessity of effecting some kind of adaptation between human nature and its environment. All the fields of human interest today have undergone this general psychologizing and socializing tendency. Whereas the 18th century thought of religion and theology as a deductive and demonstrative set of propositions, men now consider religion as primarily a social product, a way of life springing from the social organization of men's religious experiences, and theology as a rationalization of certain fundamental feelings and experiences of human nature. We no longer prove the existence of God. We talk of the meaning of God in human experience. We no longer demonstrate the future life. We investigate the effect of the belief in immortality upon human conduct. We see very clearly that this is the next stage beyond Hume, who destroyed all these things. You can no longer believe in those old ideas. This is the next stage, and has nothing to do with the scientific discovery of evolution. It is simply what is in the air. Once reason continues its march, it will end its own suicide. It will end in its own suicide. And, this is something I want to touch on too, because yesterday I talked about, or my last stream, I should say, I talked about how AI is bad for us because it's not a true person. And I went into what is the Orthodox understanding of a person versus the Western Enlightenment rational thinking of what a person is. Here in the West, we think that a person is your consciousness, that it's your self-reflectivity. Well, that binds us all to being individuals. But from the Greeks, a person, a hypostasis, can only exist in communion of love with others. And back in this is something my godmother told me tonight, actually. Back during the times of like Native American tribes, if somebody did something really wrong, what the ultimate punishment is to ignore the person, to completely socially isolate them. And they all committed suicide. It killed them. It kills you not to be in a kind of loving relationship with anybody. So this scientific, hyper-rational divorce of tradition type of mentality where we think that we're just our own little islands, it kills us. And you can see it happening in society. Not all suicides look the same. Some of them are slow. Randall continues. Evolution has introduced a whole new scale of values, where for the 18th century, the ideal was the rational, the natural, even the primitive and unspoiled. For us, the desirable is identified rather with the latter end of the process of development, and our term of praise are modern, up-to-date, advanced, progressive. Just as much as the Enlightenment, we tend to identify what we approve with nature, but for us it is not the rational order of nature, but the culmination of an evolutionary process, which we take for our leverage in existence. The 18th century could think of nothing worse to call a man than an unnatural enthusiast. We prefer to dub him an antiquated and outgrown fossil. That age believed a theory if it were called rational, useful, and natural. We favor it if it is the most recent development. We had rather be modernists and progressives than sound reasoners. It is perhaps an open question if, in our new scale of values, we have not lost as much as we have gained. The idea of evolution, as it has finally come to be understood, has reinforced the humanistic and naturalistic attitude. So, what is he saying here? He's saying it's not even about rationality anymore. It's about what's progressive. And you can see this happening in science. Oh, it's the science. Men can become women. Women can become men. It's the science. You have to do these immoral things. There's plenty of examples. Now, we must look to see what orthodoxy says about the question of evolution, where it touches upon philosophy and theology. According to the theory of evolution, man is coming up from savagery, and that is why books show Cro-Magnon man, Neanderthal man, etc. looking very savage, ready to beat someone over the head and take his meat. This is obviously someone's imagination. It is not based upon the shape of the fossils or anything else. If you believe that man came up from savagery, you will interpret all past history in those terms. But according to orthodoxy, man fell from paradise. In evolutionary philosophy, there is no room for a supernatural state of Adam. There are obviously two different systems which cannot be mixed. Those who want to keep both Christianity and evolutionism are forced to stick an artificial paradise onto an ape-like creature. What finally happens, however, is that people who do this, including many Catholics in recent decades, see that it results in the two systems becoming muddled, and therefore they come to accept that evolution must be right and Christianity the myth. They begin to say that the fall of man is only a fall from cosmic immaturity. That when ape-like creatures being in a state of naivete, evolved into human beings, they acquired a guilt complex, and that is the fall. Furthermore, they came to believe that originally there was not just one pair of human beings, but many. This is called polygenism, the idea that man came from many different pairs. Once you give in to the idea that Genesis and the origin of man must be inspected rationalistically on the basis of the naturalistic philosophy of modern thinkers, then Christianity has to be put away. Naturalistic philosophy is a realm of relative truths. In the teaching of the Holy Fathers, on the other hand, we have truths which are revealed and given to us by God-inspired men. That's what I love about these traditions. The world keeps changing, and orthodoxy stays the same. In the writings of the Holy Fathers, there is a great deal of material about evolution, although one wouldn't think so. If one thinks through what evolution is philosophically and theologically, and then looks up those questions in the Holy Fathers, there's a great deal of information to be found. We cannot go into much of it right now, but we will cover a few points in order to characterize evolution according to patristic teaching. First, we should note that according to the Holy Fathers, creation is something quite different from the world that we see today. An entirely different principle is involved. This goes against the thinking of modern Christian evolutionists. One such evolutionist, the noted conservative Greek theologian Panagiotis Trempalas, writes that it appears more glorious and divine-like and more in harmony with the regular methods of God, which we daily see expressed in nature, to have created the various forms by evolutionary methods. We will note here that oftentimes theologians are quite behind the times. In order to apologize for the scientific dogma, they often come up with things which the scientists have already left behind, because the scientists are reading the literature. The theologians often are scared that they're going to be old-fashioned or say something which is not in accordance with scientific opinion. So often they quite unconsciously fall for an evolutionary idea by not thinking the whole thing through, by not having a thoroughgoing philosophy, and not being aware of scientific evidence and scientific questions. The idea that Panagiotis Trempalas sets forth, that creation is supposed to be in accordance with the methods which God uses all the time, has certainly nothing patristic about it, because creation is when the world came into being. Every Holy Father who writes about this will say that those first 6 days of creation were quite different from anything else that ever happened in the history of the world. Even Blessed Augustine says that the creation is a mystery. He says we really can't even talk about it because it's so different from our own experience that it's beyond us. We simply cannot project present-day laws of nature back into the past and come up with an understanding of creation. Creation is something different. It's the beginning of all of this, and not the way it is now. Some rather naive theologians try to say that the 6 days of creation can be indefinitely long periods, that they can correspond to the different geological strata. This is, of course, nonsense, because the geological strata do not have 6 easily identifiable layers, or 5 or 4 or anything of the sort. They are many, many layers, and they do not correspond at all to the 6 days of creation. So this is a very weak accommodation. As a matter of fact, even though it looks as though it might be terribly fundamentalistic to say it, the Holy Fathers do not say that those days were 24 hours long. The Holy Fathers do say that those days were 24 hours long. Okay, I read that wrong. The Holy Fathers say, literally, those 6 days of creation were 24 hours long. St. Ephrem the Syrian even divides them into 2 periods, 12 hours each, which we read about earlier on the stream. So if you guys were tuning in for that, you'll know that that's true. St. Basil the Great says that in the book of Genesis, the first day is called not the first day, but one day, because that is the one day by which God measured out the entire rest of creation. That is, this first day, which he says was 24 hours long, is exactly the same day which is repeated in the rest of creation. If you think about it, there is nothing particularly difficult in that idea, since the creation of God is something totally outside our present knowledge. The accommodation of days to epochs does not make any sense. You cannot fit them together. Therefore, why do you need to have a day that is 1,000 or 1,000,000 years long? The Holy Fathers say again with one voice that the creative acts of God are instantaneous. St. Basil the Great, St. Ambrose the Great, St. Ephrem, and many others say that when God creates, he says the word, and it is, which is faster than thought. There are many patristic quotations about this, but we will not go into them here. None of the Holy Fathers say that the creation was slow. There are 6 days of creation, and they describe this not as a long process. The idea that man has been evolving from something lower is totally foreign to any of the Holy Fathers. Rather, they say that the lower creatures came first in order to prepare the realm for the higher creatures, for the higher creature, which is man, who must have his kingdom already created before he comes into it. St. Gregory the theologian says that man was made by God on the 6th day and entered into the newly created earth. There is a whole patristic teaching concerning the state of the world and of Adam before the fall. Adam was potentially immortal. As Blessed Augustine says, he was created with the possibility of being either mortal or immortal in the body, and he chose by his fall to be mortal in the body. The creation before the fall of Adam was in a different state. About this, the Holy Fathers do not tell us very much. It's really beyond us. But certain Holy Fathers of the most contemplative sort, such as St. Gregory the Sinite, do describe the state of paradise. St. Gregory says that paradise exists now in the same state as it was in then, but that it has become invisible to us. It is placed between corruption and incorruption, so that when a tree falls in paradise, it does not rot away, like we see around us, but it is turned into the most fragrant substance. This is a hint which tells us that paradise is beyond us, that some other law exists there. So the entire laws of physics could be fallen, which I really like that idea, actually. We know of people who have been to paradise, like Saint Euphrosynos the cook, who brought back 3 apples from there. These 3 apples were kept for a little while. The monks divided them up and ate them, and they were very sweet. The account says that they ate them like holy bread, which means they had something to do with matter. And it was something different from matter, or yet it was something different than matter. Nowadays, people are speculating about matter and antimatter, about what is the source or root of matter. They don't know anymore, so why should we be surprised that there is a different kind of matter? We know also that there will be a different body, a spiritual body. One resurrected body will be of a different kind of matter than we know now. St. Gregory the Sinite says it will be like our present body, but without moisture and heaviness. What that is, we do not know, because unless one has seen an angel, one has not had experience of this. We do not have to speculate about exactly what kind of matter this is, because that will be revealed to us when we need to know it in the next life. It is enough for us to know that paradise and the state of this whole creation before the fall of Adam was quite different from what we know of today. The law of nature we know now is the law of nature that God gave when Adam fell. That is, when he said, "Cursed is the ground for thy sake," Genesis 3:17. And "In pain thou shalt bring forth children," Genesis 3:16. Adam brought death into the world, so it is very likely that no creature died before the fall. Before the fall, Eve was a virgin. God made male and female, knowing man would fall and would need this means of reproducing. There is an element of great mystery in the state of creation before the fall of Adam, which we do not need to pry into because we are not interested in the how of creation. We know that there was a creation of 6 days, and some Holy Fathers say that there were 24-hour days. There's nothing surprising about this. The acts were instantaneous. God wills, and it is done. He speaks, and it is done. Since we believe in God, who is almighty, there is no problem whatsoever here. But how it looked, how many kinds of creatures there were, for example, whether there were all different kinds of cats we see, or whether there were just 5 basic types, we don't really know, and it's not important for us to know. To add to the theory of evolution the idea of God, as some Christian evolutionists do, gives no help at all. Or rather, it gives only one help. It gets you out of the problem of finding out where everything came from in the first place. Instead of a great tapioca bowl of cosmic jelly, you have God. That is more clear. It's a straight idea. If you have the tapioca jelly in space somewhere, it's very mystical and difficult to understand. If you are a materialist, it makes sense to you, but that is purely on the basis of your prejudices. But apart from this, the question of where everything came from to begin with, there is no particular help to be derived from adding God to the idea of evolution. The difficulties in the theory are still there, no matter if God is behind it or not. The modern philosophy of evolution and Orthodox teaching differ in their understanding not only of the past of man, but also of man's future. If the creation is one great filament which evolves and is transmuted into new species, then we can expect the evolution of supermen, which we will discuss shortly. If, however, the creation is made up of distinct creatures, then we can expect something quite different. We do not have to expect creatures to change or to rise up from the lower to the higher. Concerning the transmutability of kinds of creatures, the Holy Fathers have quite a different teaching. The Holy Fathers use the word kinds, according to the word used in Genesis. Species is a very arbitrary concept, and we do not have to take it as a limit. Briefly, we will quote a few Holy Fathers about this. St. Gregory of Nyssa quotes his sister, St. Macrina, on her deathbed, when she was speaking about this very question, opposing the idea of the pre-existence and transmigration of souls, which was taught by Origen. She says, in the words of St. Gregory, "Those who would have it that the soul migrates into natures divergent from each other seem to me to obliterate all natural distinctions, to blend and confuse together in every possible respect the rational, the irrational, the sentient, and the insensate. If that is all these are to pass into each other, with no distinct natural order secluding them from mutual transition. To say that one and the same soul, on account of a particular environmental body, is at one time a rational and intellectual soul, and then that it is caverned along with the reptiles or herds with the birds, or is a beast of burden, or a carnivorous one, or swims in the deep, or even drops down to an insentient thing, so as to strike out roots or become a complete tree, producing buds on branches, and from those buds a flower or a thorn or a fruit edible or noxious, to say this is nothing short of making all things the same, and believing that one single nature runs through all beings, that there is a connection between them which blends and confuses hopelessly all the marks by which one could be distinguished from one another." This shows very clearly that the Holy Fathers believed in an orderly arrangement of distinct creatures. There is not, as Aramus Darwin would have it, a single filament which runs through all beings. Rather, there are distinct natures. One of the basic works of Orthodox teaching is The Fount of Knowledge by St. John Damascene. This great work of the 8th century is divided into 3 parts. The first part is called On Philosophy. The second is on heresies, which tells exactly what the heretics believed and why we do not believe them. And the third part is on the Orthodox faith, which is one of the standard books of Orthodox theology. In On Philosophy, St. John begins with chapters which go into such things as what is knowledge, what is philosophy, what is being, what is substance, what is accident, what is species, what is genus, what are differences, what are properties, predicates. The entire Orthodox philosophy he presents is based on the idea that reality is quite distinctly divided up into different beings, each of which has its own essence, its own nature, and not one of them is confused with another. St. John Damascene meant that this part be read, and this philosophy understood, before one undertook to read his book on Orthodox theology, on the Orthodox faith. There are a number of basic books by Orthodox fathers which deal with the kinds of creatures. These are called hexameron, which means 6 days. They are commentaries on the 6 days of creation. There is one by St. Basil the Great in the East, one by St. Ambrose of Milan in the West, and the other lesser ones. There are commentaries on the book of Genesis by St. John Chrysostom and St. Ephraim the Syrian, which we read here on the stream. And there are many writings on these subjects scattered in the writings of many other holy fathers. The recent father, St. John of Kronstadt, also wrote a hexameron. These books are very inspiring because they are not mere abstract knowledge. They are full of practical wisdom. The holy fathers use a love of nature and the splendor of God's creation to give examples for us human beings. There are many quaint little examples of how we should be like the dove in its love for its mate, how we should be like the wiser animals and not like the dumber animals. In our own monastery, we can take an example from our squirrels. They are very greedy. We're not supposed to be like that. We should be gentle like the deer. We have all around us examples like that. In his Hexameron, St. Basil quotes God's words in Genesis, "Let the earth bring forth." This brief command, says St. Basil, was immediately a mighty nature and an elaborate system which brought to perfection more swiftly than our thought the countless properties of plants. Elsewhere, about God's commandment, "Let the earth bring forth vegetation," Genesis 1:11, St. Basil says, "At this saying all the dense woods appeared, all the trees shot up, all the shrubs were immediately thick with leaf and bushy, all came into existence in a moment of time." In the 9th homily of his Hexameron, St. Basil has a quote on the very question of the succession of creatures, one after the other. He quotes Genesis, "Let the earth bring forth living creatures according to their kinds, cattle and creeping things and beasts of the earth," Genesis 1:24. St. Basil says about this, "Consider the word of God moving through all creation, having begun at that time active up to the present and efficacious until the end, even to the consummation of the world. As a ball, when pushed by someone and then meeting with a slope, is borne downward by its own shape and the inclination of the ground and does not stop before some level surface receives it, so too, the nature of existing objects set in motion by one command passes through creation without change, by generation and destruction, preserving the succession of the kinds through resemblance until it reaches the very end. It begets a horse as the successor of a horse, a lion of a lion, and an eagle of an eagle. It continues to preserve each of the animals by uninterrupted successions until the consummation of the universe. No length of time causes the specific characteristics of the animals to be corrupted or effaced, but as if established just recently, nature, ever fresh, moves along with time. This is a statement not of science, but of philosophy. This is the way God created creatures. Each one has a certain seed, a certain nature, and transmits it to its offspring. When there is an exception, then this is a monstrosity. And this does not invalidate the principle of the nature of things, each one of which is quite distinct from the other. If we do not understand the whole variety of God's creation, that's our fault, not God's. St. Ambrose has a number of quotations along the same line. His Hexameron is very close to St. Basil's in spirit. We have other quotes from the Holy Fathers, which shows us a very interesting thing, that they were combating in ancient times something akin to the modern day of evolution. This was the heretical idea that the soul of man was created after his body. The same idea is taught today by Christian evolutionists, although, of course, the ancient heresy is not the same as the modern theory. Those who taught the ancient heresy based their idea on a misinterpretation of Genesis 2:7, "And God formed man of the dust from the earth, and breathed into his face the breath of life, and man became a living soul." Even today, Christian evolutionists seize on this passage and say, that means man was something else first, and then he became human. In ancient times, this false idea that the soul was created after the body was contrasted by the opposite, an equally false idea of the pre-existence of souls. The Holy Fathers, in refuting both of these theories, clearly stated that the soul and body of man were created simultaneously. Thus, St. John Damascene writes, "The body and the soul were formed at the same time, not one before and the other afterwards, as the ravings of Origen would have it." St. Gregory of Nyssa goes into greater detail in refuting both heresies. First, he describes Origen's idea of the preexistence of souls, that is, that souls fell down into our world, which is very Gnostic. Some of those before our time have dealt with the question of principles. Think it right to say that souls have a previous existence as a people in a society of their own, and that among them also there are standards of vice and of virtue. and that the soul there, which abides in goodness, remains without experience of conjunction with the body. But if it does depart from its communion with good, it falls down to this lower life, and so comes to be in a body. Then St. Gregory describes the other heresy, which corresponds to the idea of the modern Christian evolutionists. Others, on the contrary, marking the order of the making of man as stated by Moses, say that the soul is second to the body in order of time, since God first took dust from the earth and formed man, and then animated the being thus formed by his breath. And by this argument they prove that the flesh is more noble than the soul, that which was previously formed more noble than that which was afterwards infused into it. For they say that the soul was made for the body, that the thing formed might not be without breath and motion, and that everything that is made for something else is surely less precious than that which is made first. Surely this theory, although it is in a different climate of ideas, is very close to the modern evolutionist idea that matter indeed is the first thing and the soul is secondary. St. Gregory of Nyssa refutes this theory as follows. Nor again are we in our doctrine to begin by making up man like a clay figure, and to say that the soul came into being for the sake of this. For surely in that case the intellectual nature would be shown to be less precious than the clay figure. But as man is one, the being consisting of soul and body, we are to suppose that the beginning of his existence is one, common to both parts, so that he should not be found to be antecedent and posterior to himself, as if the bodily element were first in point of time and the other was a later addition. For we are to say that in the power of God's foreknowledge, according to the doctrine laid down earlier in our discourse, all the fullness of human nature had pre-existence. And to this, the prophetic writing bears witness, which says that God knoweth all things before they be. Susanna 42. And in the creation of individuals, we are not to place the one element before the other, neither the soul before the body, nor the contrary, that man may not be at strife against himself by being divided by the difference in point of time. For as our nature is conceived as twofold, according to the apostolic teaching, made up of the visible man and the hidden man, if the one came first and the other supervened, the power of him that made us will be shown to be in some way imperfect, as not being completely sufficient for the whole task at once, but dividing the work, and busying itself with each of the halves in turn. Of course, this whole basis for an idea of evolution is that you do not believe that God is powerful enough to create the whole world by his word. You're trying to help him out by letting nature do most of the creating. The Holy Fathers also talk about what it means that Adam was created from the dust. Some people take the fact that St. Athanasius the Great says in his writings, "The first created man was made of dust like everyone, and the hand which created Adam then is creating also, and always those who come after him." And they say, that means Adam could have been descended from some other creature. He didn't need to be taken from literal dust. You don't have to take that part of Genesis literally. But it so happens that this very point is discussed in great detail by many Holy Fathers. They come up with many different ways expressing it and make it absolutely clear that Adam and Cain are two different kinds of people. Cain was born of man, whereas Adam had no father. Adam was created of the dust, directly by the hand of Christ. Many fathers taught the same. St. Cyril of Jerusalem, St. John Damascene, and others. When we come to the question of what it is to be interpreted literally in Genesis and what is to be interpreted figuratively or allegorically, the Holy Father set forth for us a very clear teaching. In his commentary, St. John Chrysostom even points out in certain passages exactly what is figurative and what is literal. He says that those who try to make it all allegorical are trying to destroy our faith. For the most part, the truths in the book of Genesis are on two levels. They are literal truths, and they are also, many times for our spiritual benefit, spiritual truths. In fact, there are systems of 3 or 4 levels of meaning, but it is sufficient for us to know that there are many deeper meanings in the scriptures, and very seldom is the literal meaning destroyed by this. Only occasionally is the meaning entirely figurative. In general, we can characterize evolution in its philosophical aspect as a naturalistic heresy, which comes closest of all to being the opposite of the ancient heresy of the pre-existence of souls. The pre-existence of souls idea is that there's one kind of soul nature which runs throughout creation, while evolution is the idea that there's one kind of natural being or material being which runs throughout all creation. Both of these ideas destroy the idea of the distinct natures of created beings. The idea of evolution was a heresy that was lacking in ancient times. Usually, orthodoxy is midway between two errors. For example, between the doing away with the divine nature by Arius and the doing away of the human nature by the Monophysites. In this particular case, the other heresy of evolution was not incarnated in the ancient times. This heresy waited until modern times to make its appearance. We will see much more clearly the philosophical side of evolutionism when we look at a few of the first so-called Christian evolutionists. So that brings us to Chapter 3, Christian Evolutionism. So what are you guys thinking in the chat right now? Like the video, guys. It's a great suggestion by Theories of Creation. Wild Card Worship says, "Hey, Daniel. LOL. Good to see you, Wild Card Worship and Theories of Creation." Let me put you in my prayer list here. And we got Akecha. Good day to you. Bunch of emocons. Wildcard Worship says transmigration of souls. Yeah, so Origen had some theories. Just like Seraphim Rose said, really orthodoxy is always between two heresies. And there's always an extreme side to the left, an extreme side to the right. So, for example, Arianism says that Jesus Christ is just a creature, that he's not actually divine. On the other side of that, there were people like Apollinarianism, which said that Jesus was only God, but he never really became man. And there was a lot of Gnostic thought around Origen, where the Gnostics believed that basically you are a spirit and you are put into a body. But that's not at all what Orthodoxy teaches. It's simultaneous. Same thing with grace. That's another heresy that had to be defeated, is like people thinking that they could earn their salvation and other people thinking that you didn't have to do anything, that just grace is irresistible. So neither of these two things are correct. It's the middle path. It's knowing it's a paradox. And it can only be understood by the wisdom of the Holy Spirit. All right, Wildcard says, Curse Zero, Ocean is wrong. They absolutely believe in and teach that cosmic evolution and stellar evolution are real happenings. Oh, yeah, Odin. Yeah, but really, I would say the biggest part of this is that for evolution to work, you need large timescales, or else it doesn't make any sense. And even with the large timescales, you should still be seeing in Petri dishes everywhere things trying to make things like DNA. I mean, there's got to be other ways to make life than just DNA. And how does DNA even start? How does it just make itself? And it's not like it can just make itself and survive in the wild. it needs to have everything around it. There's irreducible complexity. I mean, I'm sure you guys have already heard that before, but. Wildcard says, love you, Daniel. The book is boring, though. Catch you next time. I'm sub now. Sophia of Athens says, wildcard worship, you realize that the word itself just means change, right? Biological change, cosmic change. No, it doesn't. That's not what evolution means. It doesn't just mean change. I wish it did. That would just be like, oh yeah, time exists. Yeah, of course things change. But evolution is the idea that life can come out of nothing and that species will be created through mutations. But there is no linked species between any species. The closest they ever were to be able to find was something between a reptile and a bird, and we've all heard of that. And then it turns out that was wrong, that they found birds that were much older than that so-called missing link. I'm telling you, it's actually all fake news. Gap Anime says hello. World Dissection says, I'm late. What's he reading from? I'm reading from Genesis, Creation and Early Man, the Orthodox Christian Vision by Father Seraphim Rose. And Golden Rule TV's got the right idea. He says, I hit the like whether I like the stream or not, just to be polite, just to be kind to the stream. So other people might check it out that are interested in this boring book, apparently. Let me see if I can find something that you guys will be a little bit more interested in. Are people more interested in evolution or the age of the earth? I think learning about the age of the earth kind of destroys evolution. So I think I'm going to start there. See if we got anything good. This was written by Alexander Lalomov with a PhD. And let's look at radioisotopic dating. All right. For the purpose of dating rocks, geologists refer to the effect of radioactive decay on unstable isotopes. What is the nature of this method? Many chemical elements have two forms, stable and radioactive. The second form exists for a limited time and changes into another stable form. The time span during which half of the atoms change is called the half-life period. The initial isotopes are called parent, and the final ones are called daughter. There are two main methods of isotopic dating. The first one is based on the transformation of the radiogenic isotope carbon-14 into stable nitrogen-14. Carbon has a half-life period of about 5,500 years. The carbon-14 method, which is used for dating organic materials, cannot be applied to old samples, anything older than 50 to 60,000 years. So it is not relevant to our subject of old Earth dating. The second set of methods is based on metal isotopes, such as uranium, thorium, lead, rubidium, strontium, rhenium, osminium, potassium, argon, and other such systems. These isotopes have very long half-life periods, up to 1 billion years. Therefore, the dating of very old samples appears possible. This set of methods is based on the following suppositions. Number 1, we know the initial value of the parent and daughter isotopes. 2, the rate of decay is known and constant during the period under consideration. And 3, the minerals represent closed systems. That is, there's no elements escaped or entered into the minerals. If all 3 conditions are taken into account and the present-day content of the parent and daughter isotopes is measured, it is possible to calculate the time that has passed from the formation of the mineral. In most cases, the results of such methods of dating rocks provide extremely long ages, millions or billions of years. Followers of evolutionary theory often invoke these methods as proving the ancient age of the Earth and its strata. But is their radioisotopic age the same as the real age of the rocks? This depends on the correctness of the assumptions. And how do we check these assumptions? The best and most certain way of checking any instrumental method of measurement is to compare the results with samples which the values are known. For example, in checking scales, we should put on weights of known values. If we put on 1 gram, but the scales show us 1 ton, we have grounds to think that something is wrong here in spite of the guarantees from the producer of the scales. Hence, for an indubitable check of radioisotopic dating, we need to test rocks whose age is known for certain. The problem, however, is that there are no such samples of rocks millions and billions of years old. The age of historically registered rocks, for example, the lavas and tufts of Vesuvius volcano that fill the ancient Roman cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum, does not exceed a few thousand years. Therefore, there is no possibility of directly checking the radiometric dating within the million-billion year timescales. What about checking the method with young rocks of known ages? Well, the conventional potassium-argon dating method was applied to the 1986 dacite flow from the new lava dome at Mount St. Helens volcano. The different mineral concentrations of this 10-year-old rock gave ages up to 2.8 million years old. Apparently, the rock contains much more of the daughter isotope argon than they could have appeared as a result of the radioactive decay during the span of 10 years. What is the reason for the excess of argon? Well, the potassium-argon method presupposes that the gas argon evaporates from liquid lava, similar to bubbles in an opened bottle of mineral water. Therefore, all the argon that is formed in the lava is supposed to be of radiogenic origin. Apparently, it is not a true assumption that there was a zero content of the daughter isotope argon in the lava when it became solid. One is led to conclude that the initial content of argon was not zero, but was dependent on the depth at which the minerals were formed. Thus, the real age of the lava is significantly younger, and the radioisotopic age is a function not of age, but of thermodynamic conditions. This fact should be taken into account with all potassium-argon dating, especially of recent volcanic rocks. Samples with millions of years of radioisotopic age could be tens or hundreds of years old in reality. So we see that, at the very least, sometimes the assumption of a known initial value of isotopes is not true. This effect of excess argon in modern volcanic rocks is forgotten, however, when great ages are necessary for the concept of evolution. For example, the dating of a skeleton of Australopithecus afarensis, an ancient ape which has been proposed as our ancestor, is at about 3.5 million years by means of the potassium-argon dating of the overlaying volcanic tuff layer, and this is supposed to determine the real age of the fossilized ape. If we take into account that this age could be overestimated by many orders of magnitude, as the case of the lava dome at Mount St. Helens volcano, the ape could be seen to have lived hundreds or thousands of years ago, and the fanciful nature of the evolutionary conception of man descending from apes will be obvious even for laymen. Sometimes we can check isotopes, the the isotopic dating when the real absolute age is unknown, but the relative age is obvious. For example, the Grand Canyon of the Colorado River has a complex of different rocks. Everyone agrees that the Precambrian metamorphic rocks buried below the canyon floor are the oldest. Most conventional geologists believe that the Precambrian rocks are more than 600 million years old, and probably closer to 2 million years old. These rocks contain the diabase sills and cardanous basalts. The next rocks to be deposited were the Paleozoic and Mesozoic sandstones, shales, and limestones that now compose the canyon walls. Later, from 70 to 40 million years ago, according to the conventional view, the Colorado Plateau rose and the present erosion period began. And about 1 million years ago, the present depth of the canyon was reached. The quaternary lava flows of the Uinkaret Plateau constitute the youngest indigenous deposit. They came from a volcano that erupted after the canyon had acquired its modern appearance, spilling over the north rim of the canyon and even blocking the Colorado River. This was not more than 5 to 10,000 years ago. Thus, by a comparison of the radioisotopic ages of the oldest and youngest formations, the Precambrian and the Quaternary, we can test the reliability of radioisotopic methods. The diabase sills and cardanous basalts were dated by the potassium argon and the rubidium strontium methods at 800 to 1,370 million years old, which roughly agrees with the supposed age. Most interesting is the dating of the basaltic rocks of the Uinkaret Plateau. While the potassium argon age varies to up to 117 million years, the rubidium strontium age is about 1,270 to 1,390 million years. So that is a change of a factor of 10. The more accurate isochron age was reported to be about 1,340 million years by the rubidium strontium method and 2,600 million years old by the lead-lead method. So the youngest Grand Canyon rocks of the Uinkaret basalts and the oldest, the diabase sills, are of the same radioisotopic age. Conventional geologists explain these extremely old ages of recent lavas by appealing to the origin of the lavas, which were melted from old magma source material. Hence, the assumption of a zero content of daughter isotopes at the moment of the formation of the studied rocks is again incorrect. When the real or relative age of the rock is known, a reasonable explanation of the discrepancy will be proposed. However, if the isotopic dating is the single source of information about the real age, it will be considered as reliable. The special isochron method is called upon to eliminate errors of both the unknown initial content of the isotopes and the migration of chemical elements in the rock after their formation. But as we see in the case of Uinkaret basalts, this method can result in considerable errors. Such discrepant data are widespread in geological research. Conventional geologists realized the defects in radioisotopic dating. As the Russian geologist Kalmachev and Sidoris observe, the defects of isotopic radiometric dating are clearly seen in the analysis of available dating of objects whose geological age is reliably established. Geologists should not blindly trust results that are unfortunately widespread now. Geologic supervision and reasoning should manage the process of the interpretation of isotopic dating. A critical attitude to the results of isotopic radiometric research is obligatory. And I think it should be noted here that during the time of Seraphim Rose, this was during the Cold War, where the Russians were the Soviet Union, and at this time they were deep atheistic communists. They were heavily invested in evolution and proving it, much more than the West. So these are like their best scientists, and they're like, yeah, this dating system doesn't really work that well. So we really got to be careful the way we use it. What is implied by geological supervision and reasoning? Potassium-argon isotopes dating of the Jurassic rocks of the Caucasus Mountains varies from 18 to 278 million years. The rubidium-strontium method provides ages from 18 to 55 million years, but the correct age of these rocks is 170 to 205 million years, determined based on the basis of fossils found nearby. The conventional age of the fossils corresponds to the assumptions of evolution. A reference cut of Riphean strata in the Ural Mountains, and these rocks are aged to be about 1,500 million years, was dated with the potassium-argon method at 400 million years. Because the age is too young for evolutionary theory, the potassium-argon dating was considered wrong and was explained as the result of a metamorphic event that changed the ratio of the parent and daughter isotopes. Thus, the concept of evolution is given much more significance than isotopic dating. The well-known Russian geologist Sergei V. Mayan writes, "Quite often the radiometric absolute timescale is represented as an external scale in relation to a sequence of layers. It is impossible to agree with this, not only because of the technical imperfections of absolute dating, but also because dates are considered only if they do not conflict with the temporal relations of actual geological bodies. Thus, radioisotopic dates are considered correct only if they do not conflict with evolutionary paleontological dating, or with the principle of supposition. In the case of the inviolate strata, the lower layer is older than the overlying one. Wrong dates, on the other hand, usually fall outside the scope of even technical papers." Most scientists believe that decay rates did not change through the ages, in spite of the impossibility of knowing this for certain. It is hypothesized by the RATE group. RATE is an acronym applied to a research project investigating the radioisotopic dating sponsored by the Institute for Creation Research. Okay. It is hypothesized by the RATE group that at some time in the past, much higher rates of radioisotopic decay have occurred, leading to the production of large quantities of daughter products in a short period of time. It has been suggested that these increased decay rates may have been associated with the rock-forming processes on the early Earth, and are possibly one of the results of God's judgment upon man following creation. In studying the diffusion of helium that had been produced through nuclear decay in mineral zircon, the RATE scientists determined helium diffusion rates through minerals under various conditions. Their data indicated that the amount of helium in rocks today would not be as high as it is if the helium had been produced by a nuclear decay over millions of years. If, on the other hand, the helium had been produced within the last several thousand years, it would be expected to be retained in the rocks as observed. The high retention of helium suggests to us and many other creationists that the helium has not had time to diffuse out of the zircons. That accelerated nuclear decay produced over 1 billion years worth of helium only thousands of years ago. Such accelerated decay could reduce the radiometric timescale from gigayears down to months. So there's a lot here. I know that some people are getting a little bit bored by the overly technical wording here. So let me just distill this down into some simple ideas. We don't know why there could be the radioactive isotopes we have. One thing that might factor into it is that the magnetosphere does shift. And when these shifts happen, let's say every 6,000, 12,000 years, shout out to Ben Davidson. If you know, you know. Suspicious Observers, spaceweather.com. It's very possible that we had a micronova event that creates creates isotopes. That's one theory, is that these things happen every 12,000 years. But there's also the idea that God just made everything in the last 10,000 years. Maybe 8,000 years ago. In which case, we are trying to fit together so many things when in reality there's a cataclysm that explains why things are the way they are, like why dinosaurs seem to still have blood in them, intact blood cells and soft tissue, things that should be impossible if they were billions of years old or millions of years old, whatever. But the most important thing here is to think about the philosophical implications. If man starts out as primitive and we become more advanced in time, we're more likely to ignore traditions because we're smarter than the past. We're more intelligent than our ancestors. Unfortunately, I've heard it from some Christians. And, yes, this does end up very much affecting Christianity, because if you think that you can just read the Bible on your own and you don't trust what people have said in the past about the Bible, and you ignore the people that were closest to the apostles. I mean, like St. Ignatius of Antioch, taught by St. John himself. St. Polycarp, taught by St. John himself. I mean, to ignore the church fathers because we think that we're more intelligent now, it's a product of evolution. It really is. So let's take a look at the chat here before I switch gears a little bit. Okay, nothing new in the chat. I got something here for you guys. Heroes for Truth. Split in the church. In chapter 12, we learned about splits in the Eastern Church caused by non-acceptance by some groups of the Orthodox definition of the nature of Christ. Nestorians, who tended to favor the human side of Christ's nature at the expense of his divinity, and thought of Mary as the mother of Jesus the man and not as the mother of the divine Christ. Nestorians flourished in the areas around Antioch and sent our missionaries to China and India. The Armenian Church, located around the mountains of Caucasus, refused to recognize the Council of Chalcedon, but there is reason to suppose that they actually misunderstood some of the decrees and were mainly led by a desire to see their national church independent from the Greeks. In Egypt, there was a constant struggle between the official orthodoxy of the empire and the monophysite local bishops, and again, the allegiance of the people was influenced by their enmity to the Greek church. The Coptic Church of Egypt and its daughter church in Ethiopia were finally established in monophysites in doctrine. In Syria, the people were divided in opinion about religion. Some were Nestorian, some were Orthodox, some were monophysites. About the year 540, the monophysites, who held that in Christ there was but one essentially divine nature, found a great leader in a monk named Jacob Baradius, who became their bishop and organizer of the so-called Jacobite Church. The separation of these several groups from the Orthodox Church was not caused by theological differences alone. They were the results of national movements, resenting the dominion of the Byzantine Empire. The Syrians, Armenians, and Egyptians were Christians, but they never became completely Hellenized, and their deepest feelings were reserved for their own race and land. In the first half of the 7th century, the Byzantine Emperor Heraclius succeeded at the price of tremendous efforts to repulse the Persian invasions and reunite most of the Near East to the Byzantine Empire. With the war over, the emperor taxed heavily the populations of Syria and Egypt in order to pay back the loans made during the war. This measure did not make him popular among people already alienated from the Byzantine Empire by religious differences. Heraclius realized that the difficulties of the situation and attempted to re-establish religious unity by introducing a compromising formula, neither monophysite nor orthodox. The formula was known as monothelite, one will. So monophysite means one physis, one person, and monothelite means one will. The formula stated that Christ was both human and divine, but only had one will, his divine will. The result was a new split, a new schism, the monophilites, who were condemned by the Sixth Ecumenical Council. Monophyite teachings were accepted by Syriacan Christian groups around the monastery of Beit Marun, who became known under the name of Maronites. In the 12th century, they joined the Roman Church. Heraclius died in 641 without having achieved his aim of unification. Soon, the situation became far worse because of the Arab invasions. During the 7th century, the Arabian tribes were converted to a new and dynamic religion. You guys might know it. It's called Islam, preached by Muhammad, who lived from 570 to 632. United in a caliphate by his successors, the Arabs became the most dynamic, the most irresistible conquerors in world history. Within 2 or 3 years, the swift horsemen of Islam invaded and held in their hands all of Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, Egypt, all of North Africa, and Spain. Yeah, Spain for a while until the Reconquista. They were repulsed in France in 732, and the Byzantine emperors were barely able to defend Constantinople and its territories in Asia Minor. Syria and Egypt, with its ancient patriarchs of Alexandria and Antioch, passed under the permanent rule of Muslims. The swift conquests were partially made possible because the Byzantine rule was so unpopular. The Arabian invasion did not seem as great a disaster as it might have been under other circumstances. During the first centuries, the rule of the Arabian caliphs was enlightened and favorable to Christians. Christians who refused to become Muslims had to pay taxes, but those taxes were less than the ones the Byzantine emperors had leveled. The Muslims were especially lenient with schismatic Christians, particularly in Egypt, where the Copts looked upon their new rulers as deliverers. Under the first Arab rulers, Palestine became a center of Christian intellectual activity, and in the 8th century served as a haven of refuge for victims of imperial persecutions. It was only centuries later that the Arab rule became much harsher. But by that time, there was no more question of the Near East return under the Byzantine influence. So the Muslims started out as being quite friendly to the Christians. They're like, you're the people of the book. We'll charge you taxes, but not as bad as the Byzantine emperor. And you can go to your pilgrimages to Palestine just fine. But time goes on, they get more and more control, and then they show their real colors. Then off with their heads. In Western Europe during the 6th and 7th centuries, 2 events were of particular importance for the history of the Church. The first was the growth of the Carolingian Empire under Charlemagne. Because Charlemagne had the vision of reestablishing the Holy Roman Empire under his power, he tended to be inimical to the Byzantine emperors, and a rather natural way of trying to discredit them was to proclaim that they did not maintain the purity of Christian faith. This was the first time that the question of the filioque was introduced in the argument between the Eastern and the Western Church. The Latin words filioque and from the Son were introduced into the text of the article of the Creed to explain that the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father and the Son. And although at the same time the Bishop of Rome gave his support to the position of the Eastern Church, one of the main stumbling blocks of in Eastern-Western relationships was firmly established. So originally the Pope said he was against it, but that would change later. The new Carolingian Frankish state was the beginning of a new type of Christianity in the West. It was the work of men from the barbarian parts of Northern Europe who were only very vaguely acquainted with the intellectual culture of the Roman Byzantine world, in which had lived the fathers of the Church, and which held the ecumenical councils. On the other hand, the Byzantines maintained a self-satisfied attitude to their own ancient and fine culture and tended to look down on the West, which was scarcely able to cope with the rudiments of learning. The East failed to recognize the importance of the new and growing power of the West. The Pope of Rome gained secular power. The other fact of great importance was the establishment of the Roman diocese as a secular state between the years 751 and 774. The popes were granted a territory of their own, which gradually increased in importance. Of course, the major authority of the Bishop of Rome was still spiritual, but he also became a prince of a state that could conduct wars, sign treaties, form alliances. This deeply affected the very nature and character of the Christian church in the West. So let me pause there, take a look at the chat here. Proverbs Guys Ministry says, I thought this show was on evolution. It is, but a lot of you guys were getting bored by the content. It's too technical for you guys. I enjoy it. I mean, I can read more of it. But the reason why I even bring up orthodoxy here is because you can see how tradition saves us. You can see how being selfish destroys our faith. And that's what was going on. There was sin in the church. That's why schisms happened. The Byzantines were looking down on the others, and the others were more interested in their national pride. And people let those things get between them and God. It became more important about power than about believing the truth. And this is something that you'll have to confront, you know, if you want to go against the science and about, you know, the age of the earth and if evolution is true or not, you're going to sacrifice some things. So with that being said, I'll get back to the book. Let's see here. Well, actually, this is pretty much the best place to be at. Is where I paused. Chapter 3, Creation Evolutionism. There are forms of evolutionary philosophy, most notably the Marxists, which loudly proclaim themselves to be an all-sufficient philosophy of life, replacing the disproved philosophy of Christianity. The arguments of these atheist evolutionists are naive in the extreme and full of self-contradictions, and there's no need to concern ourselves with them. Even many contemporary atheists outside the Soviet orbit realize that belief in God can neither be proved nor disproved, but is arrived at or rejected by means of a kind of evidence quite different from scientific proof. However, there is nothing in the evolutionary view of the world in itself which requires it to be atheistic, and in fact, the evolutionary theory makes much more sense to normal human reason if one has faith in at least some kind of God who puts the process in motion, guides it, etc. The philosophy of the world as a chance play of atoms, which themselves came into existence by chance, is satisfying only to the most limited and stunted of minds. The outlook of the Orthodox Christian towards evolution, therefore, is by no means the simple one of rejection of a philosophy which is openly anti-religious or anti-Christian. The more sophisticated evolutionists are all religions to some degree, and there are many Christian evolutionists, some of them even having the reputation of being Orthodox theologians. Here we shall examine the views of some of these Christian evolutionists, all of them either claiming to be Orthodox Christians or at least having their evolutionary views recommended by Orthodox Christians. In this way, we shall be able to see the evolutionary philosophy at its best, reconciled with Orthodox theology, as it were. And so we shall be able to begin to see whether the philosophy of evolution is really compatible with Orthodox Christianity. Here we shall not subject the views of these Christian evolutionists to detailed criticism, but will rather look to see what questions these views raise for the Orthodox faith. These questions will then be examined in detail in our final section on the Orthodox patristic view of creation. In the last few years, there have been articles, small articles, some longer ones, in the Orthodox press on this very question of evolution. The official Greek Archdiocese newspaper, the Orthodox Observer, printed several articles which are quite surprising in that they are so far from orthodoxy. One of these, Evolution, a Heresy? Quotes the well-known Orthodox theologian Panagiotis Trampalas. It appears more glorious and divine-like and more in harmony with the regular methods of God, which we daily see expressed in nature, to have created the various forms by evolutionary methods, himself remaining the first and supreme creative cause of the secondary and immediate causes to which are owed the development of the variety of species. This is the view of all Christian evolutionists, and it raises the extremely important question of whether it is possible to attain knowledge of God's creation by means of the regular methods of God, which we daily see expressed in nature. This is by no means as simple a question as it may appear. And another, no less important question is raised by this view. What is it then that God created in the beginning? Did he create only the cosmic blob to which atheist philosophers reduce the origin of the evolutionary process? Or must we be totally agnostic about this beginning, as many atheist philosophers tell us we must be? The article concludes, as long as Christians recognize the creative power of God in the process of evolution, it is both bold and hasty to call evolution a heresy. This conclusion reveals rather clearly the simple-minded approach to the whole question of the philosophy of evolution which prevails in Christian evolutionists, who have not given serious and critical thought to the real problems which this philosophy presents for orthodoxy. The whole point of this article, which seems to present the viewpoint of many of the Orthodox clergy in America, that is, those who have been raised in an evolutionary atmosphere without giving much thought to it, is this: if God is added to the theory of evolution, it becomes acceptable to Orthodox Christians. We're only against evolution if it's atheistic. But this is surely a very naive answer to a rather complicated question. What of the philosophy of evolution itself? Is it compatible with Orthodox Christian theology and philosophy, even with God added to it? All the great heresies of history also believed in God. Indeed, the demons also believe and tremble. James 2:19. More rigorous thinking than this is required before an Orthodox Christian can know what to think of evolution. The article in the Greek Archdiocese newspaper says that evolution cannot really be a heresy because there are many Christians who believe in it. Besides Trampalas, it refers to two other Christian evolutionists, Le Comte du Noy and Teilhard de Chardin. Let us look for a moment at Le Comte du Noy and his views. Pierre Le Comte du Noy, I'm just going to call him Pierre from now on. Pierre was born in Paris in 1883. and died in New York in 1947. A widely known and respected scientist, mathematician, and physiologist, he wrote several books on scientific philosophy. His popular book, Human Destiny, sets forth his conclusions about evolution. Turns out he was not much of a Christian, for he believed that man created his own God, who is actually a formidable fiction. He was very patronizing towards Christianity. He believed that Christianity has been misunderstood and misinterpreted, but it is still good for the masses. And it is useful as a tool for man's continuing evolution on a moral and ethical plane. It has no objective, absolute truth. Christ is not God, but he's perfect man. Christian tradition, however, somehow helps to educate the race towards further evolution. He says this: "We are at the beginning of the transformations which will end in the superior race. Evolution continues in our time, no longer on the physiological or anatomical plane, but on the spiritual and moral plane. We are at the dawn of a new phase of evolution." It is difficult enough to find scientific evidence for physical evolution, but it's impossible to find evidence for spiritual evolution. Nevertheless, he believes in it, and he says, "Our conclusions are identical with those expressed in the second chapter of Genesis, provided that this chapter is interpreted in a new way and considered as the highly symbolical expression of a truth which was intuitively perceived by its redactor or by the sages who communicated it to him." Of course, the book of Genesis was not written through mere human intuition. On the contrary, the Holy Fathers say that Moses heard from God the truths contained in it. St. John Chrysostom says the book of Genesis is a prophecy of the past. That is, Moses saw an exalted vision of what the world was in the beginning. St. Isaac the Syrian describes how such a vision can take place, how the soul of a holy man can ascend to a vision of the beginning of things. Describing how such a soul is enraptured at the thought of the future of incorruption, St. Isaac writes this: "And from this one is already exalted in his mind to that which preceded the composition or the making of the world, when there was no creature, nor heaven, nor earth, nor angels, nothing of that which was brought into being, and to how God, solely by his good will, suddenly brought everything from non-being into being, and everything stood before him in perfection." Monsieur Le Comte du Noy continues, "Let us try to analyze this sacred text as though it was a highly symbolical and cryptic description of scientific truths." This is, of course, extremely patronizing, as if poor Moses tried his best to get a scientific picture of the way things were, and all he came up with were these images. Perrier explains, "The omnipotence of God is manifested by the fact that man, descended from the marine worms, is today capable of conceiving the future existence of a superior being and of wanting to be his ancestor. Christ brings us the proof that this is not an unrealizable dream, but an accessible ideal." That is, Christ is some kind of Superman. And this is the ideal of which man is now evolving towards. Perrier gives us a new criterion of good and evil, which he says is absolute with respect to man. Good is that which contributes to the course of ascending evolution. Evil is that which opposes evolution. The respect of human personality is based on the recognition of man's dignity as a worker for evolution, as a collaborator with God. The only goal of man should be the attainment of human dignity with all its implications. He goes on to say that there are thinking men in all religions, and therefore all religions have a unique inspiration, a spiritual kinship, and original identity. He says this: "The unity of religions must be sought in that which is divine, namely universal in man. No matter what our religion, we are all like people at the bottom of a valley who seek to climb a snowy peak that dominates the others. We all have our eyes fixed on the same goal. Unfortunately, we differ on what road to take. One day, provided they never stop ascending, they must all meet at the top of the mountain. The road to it matters little." Of course, the top of the mountain is not the salvation of the soul. It is not the kingdom of heaven, but is precisely the chiliastic New Age. Now, Chiliasm, if you didn't know, is the belief in a literal millennial reign of Christ, which is a heresy. It was declared a heresy in the early church, but some people still believe it. It may be seen with little difficulty that Perrier's views are not at all orthodox or even vaguely Christian, but deistic. It is useful for us to know these signs, however, because behind the surface of a religious relativism, which no Orthodox Christian can accept, Perrier's evolutionary views are by no means untypical of contemporary Christian evolutionists, including many Orthodox Christians, and they raise philosophical and religious questions which any thinking Orthodox Christian must be prepared to answer. Let us mention here two groups of these questions. 1. As a corollary to the universality of evolution, which all evolutionists accept, that is, that everything in the world evolves, nothing is accepted from this natural process, he sees in the future of human evolution the coming of a superman or a superior race. Where have you heard that before? Also, he speaks of the future of human evolution as a moral and spiritual plane. Can an Orthodox believe in such things? If not, what reason does he have to exempt man from the otherwise universal natural processes? And 2, the book of Genesis, Perrier believes, must be interpreted in a new way, symbolically. Specifically, the transgression of Adam was not a historical event, but simply the symbol of the dawn of human consciousness. Can an Orthodox Christian believe this? How does Orthodox Christianity understand the book of Genesis? Let us now return to the views of evolution of other Orthodox Christians. In another article of the Greek Archdiocese Orthodox Observer, Father Anthony Kostoros answers a question sent in by a reader. If Adam and Eve were the first humans, where did their son Cain get his wife? Does our church shed any light on this question? Father Kostoros replies, man's origin is too far back in history for any person or group to know how man began. What, then, is the book of Genesis for? Oh, that's Seraphim Rose adding his own comment there. Yeah, what is Genesis for? If nobody knows how it began. Science is still groping for answers. The word Adam denotes earth. The word Eve, life. Generally, and only generally, our traditional theologians take the view that all of us stem from one male and one female. There are others who feel that humankind appeared in clusters, a few here, a few there. No theologian has the definite answer on the subject of man's origin and his development. The dawn of human history is a mystery. According to Father Kostoros, it is science that is trying to find the answer to this question. Evidently, the Orthodox interpretation of Genesis is quite symbolical and allegorical. We do not really know whether such a person named Adam ever existed. This is the view presented by the official Orthodox Archdiocese newspaper. So, you can see how the Greeks have fallen. And what of the Orthodox theology of Adam, the first created man? What of the Orthodox feast devoted to Adam and the other forefathers? What of those who have Adam for their patron saint? Is it a matter of indifference to an Orthodox Christian that the Church, if the Christian evolutionists are correct, may have been mistaken all these centuries in her teaching on the subject, and that this teaching may now have to be revised, if science, after all, does come up with the answer to the question of man's origin? Is it an exaggeration to say that it is extremely important for an Orthodox Christian to have a very clear view of the Church's teaching on the origin of man, as well as a clear understanding of the limits of science in exploring this question? And here we got an icon of Father Adam. Holy Forefather Adam. So we have an icon of him. We believe he was a real person. Later, in another answer to a reader's question, Father Castor says this: perhaps there are many Adams and Eves who appeared concurrently in different areas and then met. How man was created and how man procreated initially is a mystery. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Our church gives you the opportunity to ponder the subjects you mention and come up with your own speculation about them. The Orthodox answer to the question, where did Cain get his wife, is actually very easy. Adam and Eve had many children who are not mentioned by name in Genesis. The account in Genesis is only the basic outline of the story. Father Castorus mentions the possibility that humankind appeared in clusters. This is a reference to the evolutionary theory of polygenism. The prominent Jesuit theologian Karl Rahner, who until recently was rather conservative in his views on evolution, has examined this question and has made a reconciliation of the evolutionary view with the Christian doctrine, because he's Catholic, in a way that will doubtless be imitated by Orthodox evolutionists in the future. In general, the Orthodox modernists are always one step behind the Roman Catholics in the process of updating the Church's views. In an article entitled Original Sin, Polygenism, and Freedom, summarized in Theology Digest in the spring of 1973, Radner proposed two questions. How is evolution compatible with the doctrine of Adam's pre-natural gifts? And can we seriously think that the first man to evolve was capable of the first sin? He answers, scientists prefer to conceive hominization, that is the making of man, as having taken place in many individuals, a population rather than a single pair. And Seraphim Rose says, actually, some scientists think that and some don't. He says that it is the first group of recognizable men, original men, that committed the first transgression. Grace could be offered to the original group, and upon being rejected by that group's free and yet mutually influencing choice, he lost the whole of succeeding humanity. Radner then asked this question. In the first man or group, such a paleontology reveals to us how could there have been a degree of freedom sufficiently developed to have made it possible such a fateful choice as original sin? How can we attempt to reconcile the supernatural and preternatural paradise situation of Adam, individual or group, with what we know of the origins of the biological, anthropological, and cultural world? He answers his own question by saying, it is not easy to determine precisely where and when an earthly creature actually became spirit and thus free. We may serenely reckon with the fact that original sin really happened, but at a moment which cannot be more accurately determined. It was some time, within a fairly long time span during which many individuals may have already been existing and capable of performing the guilty act simultaneously. In other words, the whole thing becomes very vague. Obviously, the next generation of thinkers is going to do away with some of this double talk. A recent book by another Jesuit sums up well the attitude of enlightened Christians towards Adam in Paradise. Stephanus Trooster is a Dutch Jesuit who, in his book Evolution and the Doctrine of Original Sin, states forthrightly, those who take the scientific doctrine of evolution seriously can no longer accept the traditional presentation. Therefore, we must find an interpretation that is relevant to our times. The proponents of the doctrine of evolution, he says, visualize mankind as a reality which, in the course of history, only very gradually matured to achieve a degree of self-realization. Its earliest emergence must be conceived of as fumbling, transitional forms appearing next to extremely primitive levels of human existence. Such primitive, intermediate forms of human life still must have been intimately fused with their prehistoric animal state. But in this evolutionary theory, there is no room for a paradisical existence of this prehistoric man. To place an extremely gifted and highly privileged spiritual man at the beginning of human life on earth appears in complete contradiction to modern scientific thought on this matter. This, of course, is true. Trooster continues. Acceptance of the modern viewpoint, however, eliminates the possibility of accounting for the genesis of evil in the world on the basis of sin committed by the first man. After all, how could so primitive a human being have been in a position to refuse God's offer of salvation? How could such a primitive being have been capable of a breach of covenant with God? Since for Trooster, the fall of Adam is not a historical event, he explains the existence of evil by giving it a new name, the phenomenon of cosmic immaturity. Adam actually is not one man, he is every man, and the book of Genesis is an idealized image of a world without sin. The author of Genesis knows quite well it does not correspond to reality. He specifically did not mean to say that the original state of grace of Adam and Eve in all its purity was once upon a time an actual reality in the history of mankind. Of course, if you believe in evolution, it makes no sense to talk about paradise. You're only fooling yourself if you try to combine these two different things. Since Christian evolutionists have thus far been fellow travelers with other modern evolutionists, Trooster doubtless represents the next step in the unfolding of the enlightened Christianity. Doubtless others will soon begin to proclaim, as does the dust jacket of Trooster's book, that Eden did not exist, and evolution proves it did not, and that evolution has utterly destroyed the Eden myth and the Adam myth, and that therefore that man has not fallen from perfection, nor have pain and death come into the world as a result of sin. Theologians like Trooster have drawn thoroughgoing conclusions from the message of evolution. Is it possible to believe in evolution and not draw these same conclusions? The Roman Catholics in the past have had some problems about knowing when man began, if one accepts evolution. There are different theories depending on what one thinks. I don't know what is allowable now, but in the old days, you were not allowed to believe that man's soul could evolve from matter. You had to believe that man was given a soul at a particular moment. At that moment, he became man, and therefore he was no longer subject to all the laws of evolution. Obviously, this attempt to make evolutionary theory correspond with Christian belief is another case of sticking in an epicycle. Such a reconciliation does not actually work. Either you believe in evolution, in which case man was once a very primitive creature and came from the beasts, or else you believe that man descended from a being who was greater than we are now, who was actually perfect man in his own way and was not subject to corruption. The Holy Fathers even tell us that Adam did not void fecal matter. He didn't poop. The original Adam did not poop. He had the tree of life to eat from, but he did not eat as we know of it. In his conversation with Matalvalov, Saint Seraphim of Sarov had a whole section on the state of Adam, how he was not subject to being injured or hurt. He was quite invulnerable to the elements. He could not be drowned, as just one example. And this is true. I've read on the stream before the acquisition of the Holy Spirit by Seraphim of Sarov, and he does say that. It is interesting that even in the Middle Ages, Thomas Aquinas precisely asked these questions and tried to solve them. What was the state of Adam? Did he void fecal matter? How was it that he could not be harmed? He has elaborate explanations. First of all, he says that Adam did void fecal matter because we cannot believe that he would be of a different material than we are now. Secondly, he was never harmed and was impervious to drowning, not because it was impossible, but because God arranged to take all the boulders out of the way, never to have the stream rise too high, etc. In other words, God arranged the world correctly so that Adam walked very carefully and never happened to get hurt. The Roman Catholics teach that the state of man in paradise was a supernatural state, that man actually was just like we know him today, mortal man, but God gave him an extra gift, a special state of grace. When he fell, he simply fell away from that extra grace, which had been added to him, and therefore his nature was not changed. The Orthodox Church, on the other hand, believes that man was originally incorrupt and immortal, according to his natural condition. Abba Dorotheus states this in the very first chapter of his Discourses, where he sets forth for us the image of Adam, the first man, to give us an inspiration of what we have to strive for and to return to. We are meant to live eternally in the body, and that is the way it was in the beginning. Only after falling did we lose that natural condition, that blessed state in which Adam was beholding God. Our very nature was changed and was ruined at the fall. Christ is the new Adam, and in him we are restored to our old nature, our former glory. So it's not about us evolving, it's about us returning to what we had before. Some fathers, like St. Simeon the New Theologian, discuss the question, why then did we not immediately become immortal when Christ died and resurrected? St. Simeon gives us the answer. It is not fitting for the bodies of man to be clothed in the glory of the resurrection and to become incorrupt before the renewal of all creatures. The creation is waiting for us to achieve our salvation, when it too will rise up to the state in which it was before the fall, in fact, even to a higher state. All this is filled with mysteries. It's beyond me, but still we know enough of it from the Holy Fathers. St. Simeon has a long passage on the state of man before the fall. The whole of creation, he says, was incorrupt, just like man, and only after the fall did the creatures begin to die. When the new world comes, the new heaven and the new earth, see Revelation 21:1, then the meek will inherit the earth, Matthew 5:5. What earth is that? Is it this earth that you see right now? Only it will be burned up and restored so that all the creatures now will be incorruptible? That is what the whole creation is striving for, what the creatures are groaning after. When St. Paul said that they were subject to futility, Romans 8:20, this means that they were subject to corruption through the fall of man. All right, he's going through another theologian right now. And then he's got Telhard. I don't really want to read his stuff right now. All right, I'd rather read from Alexei Young. He wrote this in 1972. As for evolution, which is a hoax and a fraud, if anything ever was, we have long wanted to have a good objective expose because of its devastating anti-Christian religious overtones and even foundation, but have never had the chance to go into it ourselves. The statements of Father L, which you quoted on it, sound naive in the extreme. Over a year ago, Father N mentioned he was going to print an article on the subject of Kalomiros, but we assumed it would be entirely critical and expose the whole fraud of it. We know of no conceivable watering down or modification of the evolutionary hypothesis which would make it acceptable either to theology, philosophy, or science. Certainly, the more sophisticated scientists today no longer take it seriously and recognize that it became popular solely by the act of faith and a highly rigged evidence. Well, I think it's beyond us to start interfering with other fellow Orthodox publications and argue over what we think they should print, unless, of course, we have some facts or information they don't have, or unless they ask us to give our opinion. But surely we have the right to accept or reject what they say, even if we feel it is necessary to publish something that contradicts it. Without, of course, publicly fighting with them. I guess we'll just have to wait and see. There's usually more noise than ever that comes out of the grapevine in the public view. We cannot imagine that Father N or Father P would publish anything really pro-evolution, but even a vague middle-of-the-road article would be harmful enough, in view of the fact that evolution seems to be a key in the whole program of anti-Christianity. Another letter from Alexei Young. The evolution article for the next issue looks very good to us, quite comprehensive and to the point, and I also don't think there's anything there to which Father P and others would object. I'll tell you what I gathered from them below. However, the article could be improved by expanding a little on several points. 1. At the bottom of page 1, you mention any form of evolution, and at the end of that paragraph, you specify atheistic physical evolution or theistic physical evolution or spiritual evolution. However, your article is really addressed almost entirely against atheistic physical evolution and its absurdities. And some people might take advantage of this to say that you aren't really considering the more refined forms of theistic or spiritual evolution. In such a short article, of course, it's really not possible to go into them, but perhaps a sentence or two more on them will show why they can't be taken seriously either and are not at all more refined, just more vague and confused. Thus, theistic evolution, as I understand its motives, is the invention of men who, being afraid that physical evolution is really scientific, stick God in various forms of the evolutionary process in order not to be left out, in order to conform theology to the latest scientific discoveries. But this kind of artificial thinking is satisfactory only to the most vague and confused minds, for whom apparently God supplies the energy in order that can't be explained according to the second law of thermodynamics. It is satisfactory neither for theology nor for science, but just mixes the two realms up. Again, spiritual evolution applies the conclusions of atheistic physical evolution to the spiritual realm, and comes to the results which are monstrous and unacceptable either from the scientific or the theological point of view, a mix-up and confusion which can only disguise itself in fantastic jargon, like that of Teilhard de Chardin. Yeah, that's why I didn't want to read about him. Both these kinds of evolution depend entirely on acceptance of physical evolution, and if this is shown to be unsound, they all fall apart. In addition, they are self-contradictory, because the whole purpose and intent of the theory of physical evolution is to find an explanation of the world without God. That is, physical evolution is by its nature atheistic, and it's only ridiculous when theologians run after the latest scientific theory in order not to be left behind by the times. I'm afraid I'm wasting too many words on this point, but you really should tell the reader a little bit more as to why other kinds of evolution are no more satisfactory. The essential point, of course, is that evolution is not at all scientific, but rather a kind of science fiction theology, the product of faith, an atheistic faith, but nonetheless a faith. That it is still so widely accepted surely shows how low not only theology, but just plain common sense thinking have fallen today. I still remember my freshman professor of zoology expatiating on the great ideas of man. For him, the greatest idea man ever invented was the idea of evolution. Much greater, he believed, than the idea of God. A second point. On Piltdown, Peking, Java Man, etc. on page 3, isn't Piltdown the only one that is universally accepted as a fraud? If so, it would be wisest to emphasize that, citing the book on the subject if you have the reference at hand, and mention the great doubts and questions surrounding the others, so as not to be accused of racing ahead of the evidence. Thirdly, the second law of thermodynamics, you better give a brief definition at the beginning. Number 4, you end with a reference to the gospel of foolishness, which might inadvertently lead some readers to think that, after all, you admit that evolution somehow makes sense, and you have to be higher and more spiritual to see that it doesn't. No. On every level, from common sense on up, evolution is nonsense. Behold what real unredeemed foolishness they fall into who try to do without God. The article, though short, is excellent, with a very good use of quotes from Darwin and others. Probably you will get lots of discussion on this. Perhaps one day you could put together a longer, more detailed article on evolution, with ample citations from both evolutionists, showing their naive faith and sloppy thinking, and the sound critics. I recall a good book I read some years ago by an ornithologist, Douglas Dewar, Difficulties of the Evolutionary Theory, to serve as a reference source for those who care to think seriously on the subject. In general, people are so afraid of challenging scientists on their own ground that they're afraid to get into this subject. A little clear thinking, such as your short article, already reveals the little short article already reveals this is a typo, but it can dispel a lot of this fear in the fog that surrounds the question. Father P mentioned a little the question of evolution. I didn't mention your forthcoming article on the subject. Enough for me to see his basic attitude and fears, I think. His concern about fundamentalism stems from a fear that Orthodox battle against evolutionism might get bogged down on the same level as the supposed scientific arguments for it, and there thus might be endless arguments on fossil evidence, the precise meaning of the 6 days, etc. He is, of course, right that our Orthodox approach to the subject should not be on the scientific, but rather the theological level. But I also gather that he is not fully aware of the flimsiness of the scientific evidence in favor of evolution, which makes him perhaps overcautious and fearful on the whole subject. Yes, we should keep our basic approach high and theological, but we can also blow up the scientific evidence, which doesn't make any sense and which is really the result of blind prejudice and false theologizing in the guise of science. This is his letter back from Father N. The most important point regarding evolution. First of all, let us shock you right off by saying that we read the article before publication, made many suggestions which are all incorporated into the article, and fully approved it. And now rereading it after receiving your letter, we find nothing seriously wrong with it, except that it is much too short and concise. Of course, now with your letter, it becomes obvious also that the approach was perhaps too abrupt and direct for many Orthodox readers today, and more preparation of them should perhaps be made. Therefore, there is obviously some deep disagreements between your views and ours on this subject. I've always regarded evolution in all its ramifications as an important part of the American modern intellectual baggage, which I left behind when I became an Orthodox. And it never before occurred to me that any aware Orthodox Christian would regard it as unimportant, especially now when many scientists have abandoned it purely on scientific grounds, when the pseudo-religious presuppositions of its supporters are so evident, and when it is so much bound up with Masonry ecumenism and the whole pseudo-religious modern outlook. We were frankly astonished at your objection to the article and have been thinking long and hard to try to find your thinking on this subject. Then it occurred to us, apparently you regard modern ideas as being of two types: those that directly attack the church, which must be confronted and uprooted mercilessly, like Masonry and ecumenism, and those which do not directly attack the church and are not directly theological, like evolution. Is this true? Nonetheless, I don't see how it can be denied that modern ideas are, after all, one whole. They are formed first outside the church, develop in an atheistic, agnostic mind, and then move through the whole of society until they reach the church, changing form in the meantime to fit in with each current of ideas. Evolution is one such idea, but is not really an idea. See below. That has not yet directly attacked orthodoxy. But look what it has already done to the Roman Catholics. It is not true that the whole dissolution of Roman Catholicism in the last decade is directly bound up with the unleashing of Teilhardism, whose books were more or less banned up until then, in that same period, a process which was presented for popular consumption 10 years ago in a rather cheap but symptomatic novel, The Shoes of the Fisherman. By this I do not mean that a certain number of Teilhardian theses were opposed to so many Roman Catholic theses and conquered them, for his evolution is not really a heresy. We will agree on this term applied to him, especially from the Orthodox side, is imprecise, but rather a whole rival thought pattern offering a whole different approach to life, and consequently, religion. And being already so much part of the spirit of the age, its approach was persuasive, not by argument, but by fitting in with unconscious attitudes of people who are outwardly Roman Catholic. We were rather surprised when you and Father E, too, as I recall, mentioned that you haven't read Teilhard and weren't familiar with his ideas. That is, you are waiting for the wave to hit orthodoxy before you start thinking of the subject. But really, Teilhardism is the Christianity of the future, or rather, its metaphysical foundation. It fits very nicely with the charismatic phenomena, and it is by no means too early to find out what is about to hit us. Here, it may well be that Alexei's position as a layman in the midst of the world, and having come from that which is outside of orthodoxy and has already been completely captured by evolutionary spirituality and philosophy, has enabled him to be aware of something that the more sheltered Orthodox, say clergy, monks, lifelong Orthodox, simply don't see yet. How overjoyed I myself was to find this shelteredness when I became Orthodox, because I saw that in this world to itself, I would no longer be able to change completely my mental orientation, not to mention spiritual, and no longer think at all in terms of the reigning despotism of ideas, in which evolution has a key place. I did notice, however, that other converts didn't seem to grasp this point, and some of them began to discuss how this or that modern current can be understood or accepted or criticized in terms of orthodoxy, a false outlook, because there are two quite separate mental worlds involved, and the difference is rather greater than that between two unrelated languages. We fully agree with Alexei that evolution is one of the most dangerous concepts that faces the Orthodox Christian today. Perhaps it is the very key to the assault upon the church, to the very philosophy of the coming Antichrist. If we understand you and Father E aright, you regard it merely an idea, which one can take or leave, and which can involve one in endless modernistic fundamentalist discussions which are totally pointless. We certainly agree on the pointlessness of such discussions, but now the issue is much deeper than that. Evolution is a whole mindset that is quite incompatible with orthodoxy. By that, it is a treatise in itself. Alexei's article, as I said, is much too brief, but perhaps it will have a good effect of inspiring a thorough treatment of the subject. It's a rival thought pattern to orthodoxy, not just another idea. Your article, beyond any doubt, is going to make you unpopular in places. Do not let this discourage you or force you into a defensive posture. Your article is probably going to do something very painful at first, but ultimately positive. Bring out into the open some attitudes which have long been hiding in the shadows. And just because this is such a quick letter, I'll read this one too. By the way, in case I didn't make it clear in my last letter, the argument against the supposed scientific theory of evolution is not itself scientific, since science itself can neither prove nor disprove it. And for science, it's only guesswork. The argument against it is theological, that it involves implications which are entirely unacceptable for orthodoxy. And these implications can't be escaped. And every propounder of evolution uses them, the theists and spiritualists being worse than the atheists. So I read a lot about what are the dangers of evolution to orthodoxy, or just to Christianity, I would call it. We believe that we fell from grace. We don't believe that we were some kind of primitive creature. And they explain this pretty well of like how can you think of Adam committing the original sin when like he must have been like just like a caveman who didn't know anything. You know, it's like he was just speaking in grunts. It's completely out of line with what we believe. And again, we know that in the end times, people will become more and more wicked, that there will be a great apostasy, that people, you know, I was reading today with some brothers in Christ on Proverbs Guys Ministries, 2 Timothy chapter 3. And we can pull that up right now, just to show you the stark difference between evolution and what the Bible tells us. But know that in the last days, troubled times will come. People will be lovers of self, lovers of money, boastful, arrogant, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, ungrateful, and unholy. They will be without natural affection, unforgiving, slanderers, without self control, brutal, no lovers of good, treacherous, stubborn, self important, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having an appearance of godliness but having rejected its inner meaning. Stay away from these people too. Indeed, some of these creep into houses and captivate gullible women who are burdened with sins, led away by various lusts, always learning, yet never able to come to the knowledge of the truth. Even as James and Jambres opposed Moses, these people also oppose the truth. They are mentally corrupted, and as far as faith is concerned, they are rejected. But they will not go very far because their folly will be obvious to all, as in the case of Janes and Jambres. You, however, have paid close attention to my teaching, conduct, purpose, faith, patience, love, steadfastness, persecutions, and sufferings. You know what happened to me at Antioch, Iconium, and Lystra. I endured these persecutions, and the Lord delivered me out of them all. Yes, all those who desire to lead godly lives in Christ will be persecuted. But wicked impostors will go forth from bad to worse, deceiving others, being themselves deceived. As for you, remain in what you have learned, which is what you firmly believe, knowing from whom you have learned them. From infancy you have known the Holy Scriptures, which are able to make you wise for salvation through faith, which is in Christ Jesus. Every Scripture is God-breathed and profitable for teaching, for reproof, for correction, and for instruction in righteousness, so that the man of God may be fully qualified and completely equipped for every good work. Doesn't look like we're going to become more evolved in time. Looks like we're going to become degenerates. And doesn't that seem to line up more with reality? You know, all the time I hear from atheists, they say, where's the evidence of God? Where's the evidence of evolution? There is none. There is no fossils of some kind of intermediate species. There's no evidence in any kind of lab that DNA can just spontaneously form at some point, or that life is attempting to be created by itself out of nothingness all the time. People kind of keep forgetting this, so that's why I'd like to repeat it, is that if you believe that something is uniformly happening all the time, and so that the time scales would eventually allow the beautifully complex life forms that we know around us today could arise, then that means that this would be happening all the time on a micro level that we could observe. And we'd be like, oh, there it is. There's those chemicals trying to make life again. You know, silly chemicals. You know, they're not binding correctly right now. But give them enough time and they'll make something new. They'll make something like DNA, I guess. But instead, we find DNA in the oldest of creatures. And our DNA is similar to... What species is our DNA closest to? Okay, so AI and the science will tell you that chimpanzees are the closest to us, 98.7% of their DNA with us. But Looks like we share 40 to 60% of the same DNA with bananas. Interesting. How much DNA do we share with a bacteria? Oh, wow, there's not a whole lot of literature on this. Okay, so between one human and another, there's 99.9% genetic similarity. There's 94% between us and dogs, 90% between us and cats, 80% between us and cows, 60% between us and fruit flies, and 60% between us and bananas. These don't seem very reflective at all of the different types. And we got this recent one from 2016, and I can share this. The Channel Island foxes are dwarfs, 2/3 the size of their mainland relatives. The most likely evolved from gray foxes that were brought to the northern islands by humans more than 7,000 years ago. A group on one of these islands, in particular San Nicolas Island, has nearly an order of magnitude less genetic variation than any other low diversity species, including the severely endangered African cheetah, the mountain gorilla, and the Tasmanian devil. That finding, which was established by earlier research, does not bode well for the foxes. A lack of genetic diversity means that individuals within a population are equally susceptible to disease, and that the species might not be able to respond to a changing environment. The island fox population suffer from both a lack of genetic diversity and the accumulation of damaging genetic variants, which are likely to worsen over time. The research also raised a question that the researchers haven't yet been able to answer. How have the foxes managed to survive as well as they have? The degree to which San Nicolas foxes have lost genetic variation is remarkable, Wayne says. It suggests that under some conditions, genetic variation is not absolutely essential for the persistence of an endangered population. For example, Robinson said, unlike other species with low diversity, island foxes have not yet been found to suffer from severe signs of inbreeding depression. The researchers compared DNA samples collected in 1988 from each of the Channel Island fox populations with the one from a gray fox from mainland Southern California. Biological theory holds that small populations of animals will lose their genetic variation and will accumulate harmful mutations as the normal processes of natural selection fails. The UCLA study found that both were true of the island foxes' genomes. The researchers write that their new findings should be considered in plans for foxes' futures, including the possible delisting from endangered species protection. So this wasn't really the best article for it, but it still gives you the same basic points, just from a very amicable position to evolution. But basically, this is the problem. They found these foxes, and they're on an island, and their genetic code is like way smaller, and yet they're actually doing better than mainland foxes. And I mean, it doesn't show that in this article, but there's other articles about this that came out pretty recently. This one was from 2016. but they've looked more into it, and they're like, by our model of evolution, you're supposed to accumulate genes over time, not lose them. And if you do lose them, it's supposed to be really damaging to you, not make you more likely to like survive. But despite the genetic change, which is drastic, it's like a 20 to 40% difference, they still look like foxes. How can that be? How does that rhyme? I don't think it does. I don't think that fox can hunt. Golden Rule TV says, escaping the matrix is a constant, intense chore. Oh, Lena says, good evening, praying for you all at adoration right now. Oh, thanks, Lena. But Mr. Loco says, how do you detect a soul? What was the method used for this? So the soul is your inner man. And how do you detect it? By introspection. So do you have a mind? Is there any internal processes happening inside of you? Or are you like an NPC? Are you like an automaton, just walking around, and you don't have any ability to think and to love others? I mean, this is where the soul comes from. It means the inner psyche. So it's our souls are made up of our minds, our hearts, and our spirits. Out of the three, the spirit is the most mysterious, but that is exactly the part of us that is the most precious, because that's the part of us that can, by the grace of the Holy Spirit, be guided. Our spirit is like our inner sight. It's what can look into the mind, what can look into the heart, and make choices. All three domains of us must be harmonized. But to answer your question about how do you detect a soul, you can't do it in others. That would be by faith, that you believe others have a soul. I know I have a soul. I don't know if you do, but I have faith that you do, because I believe that Christ made you in his image, which means you have a soul. All right, folks, I need to grab more water. What time is it here? It's already tomorrow. Let me play a song for you. We'll go with Flashlight.
It's too scary to walk alone at night. Christ, you are my flashlight. In the darkness of my soul, you are my companion. In this place that I've left cold, because I follow the will of my heart, frantically without regard to the inner. You are the healer to the hidden wreckage within. Set a fire, pour out your water, and beget. I will never cease to sing your praises. Set a fire, pour out your water, and beget. It's too scary to walk alone at night. Christ, you are my flashlight in the darkness of my soul. You are my companion in this place that I've left cold, because I follow the will of my heart frantically without regard to the inner. You are the healer to the hidden wreckage within. Set a fire, pour out your water, and beget. I will never cease to sing your praises. 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 Oh Lord, have mercy on me.
All right, I'm back. All right. Let's talk about St. Maximus on man's original condition. A detailed description of man's existence before the fall has been provided by St. Maximus in his Ambiguum 45, explaining a phrase by St. Gregory the theologian in Oration 38, that the first created man was, before the fall, naked in his simplicity and in his life without arts and skills, and without any covering or protection. St. Maximus writes this. So I suppose that the teacher said these things wanting to indicate the difference between the constitution of the human body in our forefather Adam before the transgression, and that which in us is now seen and holds sway. Because back then, man clearly was not torn apart by qualities contrary to and corruptive of each other in their bodily mixture, but was accordingly without flux or efflux, and free of the constant alteration between them, depending on which quality predominates. For indeed man was not deprived of the immortality that is by grace, and did not have the corruption that now whips him with its goads, but another constitution of the body manifestly befit him, a constitution held together by qualities that are simple and without strife. By reason of this constitution was the first man naked, not as one fleshless or bodiless, but as one having the constitution which makes the flesh denser, mortal, and unyielding. According to this great teacher, the first man both lived without arts and skills, without dissipating the natural good health given him originally in his essential being, and was without need of protective covering, fearing no shame because of his innate dispassion, and not subject to either cold or heat, for which reasons, especially the means of protective covering, both shelter and clothing, have been contrived for humans. For being dispassionate by grace, he was not by way of pleasure moved by the deceitful passions of the imagination. And existing without any want, he was free of the obligation to use arts and skills because of necessity, and being wise, he had been by way of knowledge set above the study of nature. Thus, the first man had nothing between him and God which was obstructing his knowledge and was stopping his movement towards God, a movement freely chosen out of love, from becoming a kinship. And because of this, he was called by the teacher naked in his simplicity, and existing above all research into nature, and a life without arts and skills, as being pure of all life in need of arts and skills, and without any covering or protection, since he was free of such impassioned intertwining of the senses with sensible things, to which things he was justly subjected later on, which he had fallen and found himself in deprivation, emptying of everything rather than full, inferior to those things which he had originally, or to which he had naturally been superior. From this citation, it is clearly seen that for St. Maximus, as for other holy fathers, man lived for a time in an unfallen state, without bodily corruption, and without the passions, cares, and necessities associated with human life as we know it. So this is interesting, because St. Gregory the theologian said something that could be misunderstood when he said that man was naked in his simplicity and in his life without arts and skills and without any covering or protection. It makes it seem like, okay, maybe man was primitive. He didn't have any skills or arts. But what St. Maximus is showing us is that what St. Gregory meant by this is that we had no need for skills and arts. These are things that are only needed because of the fallen world. We had everything that we needed in Christ. Anything that you could possibly want. What kind of knowledge of nature would it matter to you? He was able to name the animals. Okay, he was beyond trying to figure out science. I mean, what Adam was eventually going to get was wisdom. But unfortunately, Eve ate from the tree before they were worthy to. They ate unworthily. Saint Maximus and Saint Simeon on what might have been. And here's two of them together in one icon. I love this. Both of them together. They lived at very different times. St. Maximus was from 580 to 662, and St. Simeon, the new theologian, was from the year 949 to 1022, before the schism. Such was the condition of man in the beginning. By drawing ever closer to God in love, by naturally directing his desire and longing to him, rather than unnaturally turning it aside to things of the senses, man was to become ever more holy and spiritual, ever more in the likeness of God, ever more transformed by the grace of God. Earlier, we quoted the words of St. John Damascene, that man was to complete the mystery by being deified. Expanding on this theme, St. Maximus states that man, by freely following God's commandment in Eden, would have become a deified son of God. A God not by nature, but by grace. In the beginning, man was created in the image of God for the undoubted purpose of being born of the Spirit by free choice, and of acquiring what was in the likeness of God through keeping the divine commandment which had been laid upon him. In this way, the same man would, on the one hand, be a creature of God by nature, and on the other hand, a son of God and a God through the Spirit by grace. And here we say a God with a lowercase g. For it was not possible in any other way for man after his creation to be proved a son of God and a God through deification by grace, unless first, by free choice, we had been born of the Spirit through the self-moving and sovereign power which naturally unites him with God. Saint Simeon, the new theologian, provides us with an image of what life would have been like if the first people had fulfilled their original designation. Imagine, he writes, what sort of life and a way of living we might have had if we had been preserved incorruptible and immortal in an incorrupt world, going through life manifestly without sin or sorrow, free of cares and untroubled. And imagine, too, how by progress in keeping God's commandments and the putting into practice of our good intentions, we would have been led up in due time to a more perfect glory and transformation, drawing nearer to God and to the rays which spring from his divinity. The soul of each would have become brighter, and the perceptible and material body of each altered and changed into an immaterial and spiritual one, into something beyond sense perception, getting a glorified body. We have already quoted briefly from St. Simeon's description of the cosmos that man originally inhabited. St. Simeon is quite explicit that the entire visible creation, and not only paradise, was in a state of incorruption before the fall of man. He writes, God did not, as some people think, just give paradise to our ancestors at the beginning, nor did he make only paradise incorruptible. No, instead he did much more. Before paradise he made the whole earth, the one which we inhabit, and everything in it. Not that alone, but he also in 5 days brought the heavens and all they contain into being. On the 6th day he made Adam, and established him as Lord and King over all visible creation. Neither Eve nor paradise were yet created, but the whole world had been brought into existence by God as one thing, as a kind of paradise, at once incorruptible, yet material and perceptible. And this world, it was this world, as we said, which was given to Adam and to his descendants for their enjoyment. Does this seem strange to you? It should not. Here St. Simeon is echoing the wisdom of Solomon, in which it is declared, God did not make death, neither did he take delight in the destruction of living things. God created all things that they might have their being, and the generation of the world were for preservation, and there is no poison of destruction in them. Wisdom of Solomon, chapter 1, verse 13 through 14. As St. Simeon explains, before the original creation was changed over to corruption, it did not bear perishable fruits and sprout thorns and thistles. Compare this to Genesis 3:18. Elsewhere in the same work, he affirms that God gave man in paradise every kind and variety of fruit, fruit which is never spoiled or lacking but always fresh, full of sweetness, and providing our ancestors with indescribable pleasure and enjoyment. For it was fitting that their incorruptible bodies be supplied with incorruptible food. In other words, it was appropriate for incorrupt first created man to be given both an environment and a food that corresponded to his condition. According to St. Bede the Venerable, before man's transgression, the earth brought forth nothing harmful, no poisonous plant, no unfruitful tree. St. Philaret of Moscow, a holy father of the 19th century Russia, says the same concerning the first created plants. Since God has approved of the whole kingdom of plants, compare this to Genesis 1:12, man should not rebel against him, seeing that some plants are poisonous or noxious. If the fall of man had not subjected the entire earth to corruption, we would find in them only good and useful properties. In Genesis chapter 2, 5 through 6 in the Septuagint, we read that in the beginning God had not sent rain on the earth, but a spring came up from the ground and watered the whole face of the earth. Commenting on this passage, St. Theophilus of Antioch states, the whole earth was at that time watered by a divine spring and had no need that man should till it, but the earth produced all things spontaneously by the command of God, that man might not be wearied by tilling it. St. John Damascene notes that before Adam and Eve's transgression, there was neither rain nor tempest on the earth. St. Ephemius of Salamis states further, Adam and Eve had the purest air, temperately dispensed to them by God with all mildness, neither sharpened by the rigor of cold, nor enervated by the extremely unpleasant heat of summer. The land had been designed as an immortal abode very well made by God. It was filled with gladness and well-being, and, as I said, got neither cold nor hot. At the turn of the 20th century, the patristic teaching was reiterated by the Serbian-American church writer and missionary, St. Sebastian Dapovic. Had our first parents not broken the divine commandment, Saint Sebastian writes, there would be no need of the plow and the laboring oxen, the planting of seed, the watering shower, the mutual change of the seasons of the year, the winter binding in fetters, and the summer opening up all things. Further details about the state of creation, in particular paradise, before the fall, are provided by St. Gregory the Sinite. Eden, he says, has been planted by God with all sorts of the most fragrant plants, it always bursting with fruit, both ripe and unripe, and is continuously blossoming with flowers. According to this saint, paradise has been made between corruption and incorruption, such that mature trees and fruit turn into fragrant soil and do not give off the odor of corruption as plants do of this world. This occurs because of the great richness and holiness of the grace ever abounding there. So, sounds very different from evolution and saying that we came from a primitive species and are now more evolved than ever before. You know, people used to live longer. And people were holier. It's like you read the lives of the saints and you see the kind of courage and boldness that these saints had. Like Saint Ignatius of Antioch saying, you know, they're going to feed me to these wild beasts, but while they're devouring me alive, know that I'm bread for Christ, and I do this willingly. And it's like, we don't have that in us anymore, do we? I know I don't. I barely can abstain from the pleasures of the world, and I do that poorly. We've become so weak. We need the grace of God. It's our only hope. And evolution, it tries to steal away from us this divine gift. All these new ideas that constantly come out, and none of them have any basis where they're long-lasting. I mean, evolution is a pretty new theory, and it got very popular. It helped create forms of government like the Nazis. It sort of gave reasons to the communists and also gave reasons to the capitalists. And it overturned the whole world order. Because once you start thinking that we're more evolved than our ancestors, you have revolution. You have brand new doctrines, new denominations, new ways of reading the Bible that are completely alien and foreign to our holy church fathers. So it all kind of plays in together. I'm quite happy with not believing that we came from some missing link ape figure and believing my Bible. And I'm even quite happy with believing that this earth could very well only be, less than 10,000 years old. It's very possible. I mean, we've become so close-minded. And people guard this faith in evolution without really having good reasons for believing it. I'm not a scientist, and I assume anyone watching out here, you're probably not a scientist either. Some of us might think that we are. But the scientists themselves are abandoning evolution. They're coming up with new terms like, it's like microevolution. There's adaption. It's like, okay, well, life can adapt for sure. That's part of God's design, is for us to adapt. But you never see one species become another. And there's no evidence for it in the past. And there's certainly no evidence for abiogenesis. There's just no evidence that life can come out of nothing unless God's involved. So at this point, we're about 3 hours in. Yeah, we're beyond 3 hours in. So if I can open up the room, if people want to come in and chat about this, we'll see. If not, that is quite okay. I'll go to bed. But I'm here right now for anybody who wants to talk. And if we could maybe stick to the topic of evolution and young Earth, and you can be against it, that's fine. As long as you're not coming in here talking against orthodoxy. And I'm just not interested. I'm not interested in people trying to argue about my faith. But we can talk about the scientific theory. What I hope is a lot of Christians return to tradition and to what the Bible actually teaches us, and stop relying on these new ideas that they come out all the time, and they constantly find out that they were wrong about them. For example, there was comparative embryology. Textbooks like general zoology used to have pictures that show an embryonic fish, salamander, turtle, chicken, pig, and man, demonstrating that they all look very much alike and saying that they gradually develop differently. You can see that man has so-called gill slits in the embryos. Therefore, that is supposed to be a remembrance of his ancestry. Ernst Haeckel, in his theory of recapitulation and biogenic law, stated that an individual organism in its development, or ontogeny, tends to recapitulate the stages passed through by its ancestors, phylogeny. Today, this theory is no longer accepted by evolutionists. Scientists have found the gill slits are not gill slits at all, but are just preparing for what is to be developed in the neck of the human being. So this proof has been pretty well discarded. Again, they use the argument that similarity means proof when it in fact does not. Another proof, which used to be way more powerful than it is today, is that of vestigial organs. So they used to think that there were organs in our bodies that were just left over from evolution. Like, you don't really need your appendix or your pituitary gland. No, you don't need that. You don't need your tonsils. Just baggage from evolution. No need for it. Find out today, if you're missing these things, you might die. They're very much functional. But they just didn't know enough back then. I mean, how many of these flaws do you need to see before you start questioning the theory? There's textbooks that try to show that man has arms, birds have wings, whales have flippers, trying to convince us from their diagrams that we all look very much alike. The birds have claws and we have fingers. The book shows how one might have developed into the other. All creatures are shown to have a very similar structure, and the different structures are arranged according to different phyla and genera. Of course, this is not any kind of proof. It's very logical, however, to one who believes in evolution. On the other hand, the scientific creationists say that if you believe that God created the universe, he must have had a basic master plan of creation. Therefore, all kinds of creatures would have basic similarities. If you believe that God created all the creatures, these diagrams convince you that, yes, God created them according to a plan. If you believe that one creature evolved into the other, you look at the same diagrams and say, yes, one evolved into the other. But there is no proof either for or against evolution in these diagrams. In actual fact, people accept evolution on some other basis, and then they look at such diagrams, and the diagrams convince them that they were right. I mean, there's another issue here that I don't think Seraphim Rose touches on, but what's good for the goose is good for the gander. And there's been quite a few scientific articles that say, why aren't we all evolved into crabs at this point? Crabs are like super resilient. Horseshoe crabs, they used to dominate the earth apparently at some point. It's like, why wouldn't we all just be the same thing? If there was one kind of path of least resistance, why is there so much diversity? And you can even take it to the other extreme and be like, maybe there isn't enough diversity. If it goes the other way, if you say, well, maybe that's just not how it works. The path of least resistance has many different outlets, and there's like a bunch of different ways life could be made. Well, then why isn't there more things? Why do we seem so similar then? The only thing that actually makes sense is that God created us, that we were made with an intelligent design. God is, of course, brilliant beyond any words that we can ascribe to him. But you look around and you see the beauty of nature, and there's something inside of you that goes, this is truly God's country. Who could have made this? Yeah, there's the idea of evolution, that it's all done by chance. But as we've seen with all these proofs, they really don't add up to much. It's more of a faith. You want to believe there's no God. And the implications are might makes right. An amoralistic framework. And this is what has been used to justify all kinds of atrocities throughout history. Atrocities like eugenics, atrocities like the concentration camps, atrocities like scientific experiments on human beings, because there's no dignity there. We're just animals, right? And if it leads to good results, it doesn't matter how you got there. It becomes utilitarianism, but a worse kind. Because if there is no God, then who's to say what's the right outcome? Doubting Thomas says he used the U-232 soul detector. And Doubting Thomas says, atrocities caused by religion? Question mark. Crusades, Inquisition, etc. Well, there are some religions that do cause atrocities. But I'm an Orthodox Christian, so we're not a part of any of those. I love my Catholic brothers and sisters. I love all my Protestant Christians out there, but we are not exactly the same. And they know that, and we can respect that. And we don't have the same history. We didn't have the Crusades. We didn't have the Inquisition. To us, killing a heretic is the worst possible thing you can do. It happened once in the Byzantine Empire, where it was the government that got involved, and he wanted to put down any kind of unrest, so he killed heretics. And what did that do? It created martyrs, so that the heresy would grow. It makes no sense to kill heretics. We don't do that. You would really have to look hard throughout history to find any kind of example of it, and it's just not on the mass scale that it happened in the West. The West, unfortunately, kind of lost its way, especially during the Age of Enlightenment. This is where everything changed. I think, therefore I am. This is where we got the idea of personhood is consciousness and self-reflectivity, when in reality, from the Orthodox perspective, person means that you have to be in communion of love with others, or else you're not a person. You're just an isolated individual who will die a spiritual death at least, but probably a bodily death. Well, not probably, everybody dies a bodily death. But, what I'm saying is people can actually commit suicide because of this. It's happened a lot in history, and it continues to happen to this day. People realizing the dead end of Western philosophy. This is why in today's modern times, we live in a postmodern world. That's not even a joke. That's actually what they call it. And we have abandoned rationality because if we were to continue with rationality, everyone would become very depressed. Because a world without God means that you have no meaning. Everything has to be dependent on another cause. And without the memory of an immortal being, your life never even happened. That's just the facts. Yeah, you could say it did. But if a tree falls in the forest and nobody's around to hear it, who cares? And inside of all of us is a yearning for a transcendent love that never changes. If you take this away from human beings, we go insane. Because you lose the grace of God. So, what do we have in this postmodern world? Well, we no longer embrace rationality. Now we embrace feelings. And that has become part of science. And people in the chat were like, oh, why are you going against science? Science goes against itself, okay? One textbook argues with another textbook. Science was supposed to be, from the scientific method, something somewhat humble, where like you keep testing things and find out theories based off of evidence. But the exact opposite has happened today. Now we come up with our theories, like there are more than one gender in human. There's more than two genders. There's 7 of them. Okay, well that's what people want to believe. Well, let's make the science fit that somehow. And now it's science. Men can become women. Women can become men. It's just the science. No, it's not. They're just calling it science. It's faith. It's dogma. It's a secular dogma. It's something that people can latch on to. Everybody needs to worship something. We're worshiping beings. We were designed with hearts. And you put your trust and your faith in something. Fortunately, a lot of people put their faith in evolution. And that the earth is super old. It makes us feel very insignificant, which I think is why evolution is really evil's resolution. Because what are the implications of it? Again, a godless society. Amoral. I would say confused. Because it doesn't actually conform with its own framework. I mean, if it's in the framework of science, it's not conforming to it. The science itself is turning against itself. But really, the core of it is that we become sort of like these icebergs in an endless ocean. And all that matters is that you get somewhere that you never do. The myth of progress. One day we'll have a just society. And you think that you're working towards it. And that's not what's going to happen. The Bible tells us what's going to happen. It doesn't matter how much people fight and scream about it. It will happen. And we're already seeing it happen. This world has an expiration point. Such things were not meant to last. Because we were designed not to suffer so much. We were designed to love God. We weren't designed to kill each other like this. But that's what an atheistic world does, doesn't it? No God, no rules. Whoever has the most power wins. But if you have faith in God, you have a fear of God, it's not how it works. Doubting Thomas says, you have a God whose might makes right no difference. No. No, I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to agree with that at all. God suffered for us. He suffered on the cross. A painful and shameful death. And he blessed us instead of cursing us as we killed him. How's that might makes right? That's meekness conquers the world. You haven't seen that yet. You don't know what true Christianity is. That's why you fight against it. Sophia says, Burning Bush's channel, why can't you make your own meaning, Daniel? One Bible argues with another Bible. It's not even the case. If it's the Bible, then it's not going to argue with itself. Only people can make the Bible argue against itself by coming up with their own interpretations. If you stick to the holy faith of the Apostolic Church, it's all there for you. You probably won't have enough lifetime to learn it all, but you don't have to be worrying about which person is right about this or that subject. We can get to work being good Christians. Sophia of Athens gives an Arianist comment here. He says, Jesus suffered on the cross, not God. I got a news flash for you. I'm a Christian, and Jesus is God. Now, in regards to your question, why can't I make my own meaning? You can try. I used to. Didn't get me very much. Got me a mouthful of dust. There was an earthquake in my soul, and the world swallowed me up. And it's because I tried to create my own meaning. I used to do that. I was an occultist, so I was very well acquainted with the idea of making my own meaning. That's the whole point of it. Sophia says, that doesn't mean you stop trying, Daniel. Yeah. Well, Sophia says, creating your own meaning is hard, but it's worth it. No, it's not. First of all, it's not hard to do. Anyone can come up with their own meaning. Let's think of one right now, just as a thought experiment. Oh, the meaning of life is to make money. Make as much money as possible. You only got so much time, so you better be making a lot of money, because money is power in this world. And don't let anyone get in your way. If somebody hurts you, hurt them 7 times harder back. Then they'll never mess with you again. Also lie to people, to manipulate them. Not lying to people just to make up lies, but to get ahead in the world. See how easy that is? It's called hedonism. It's called atheism in the world that we live in today. It's the world that you inhabit, the one that you complain about all the time. And you know you do. I'm not saying that I've read comments that say that you do. I just know that every human being complains about it. We all see that the two-party system is corrupt, and then we know that corporations really run the show, and that your vote barely matters at all, and we all complain about it. But we're never diagnosing the root issues. The problem is that we got away from God. And evolution is one of these silent little pillars of your atheism. Well, the earth has been around for, I don't know how many billions of years. It was around for 4 billion years, I guess. The moon It was because another planet collided with our planet. And then, I guess that caused a mass extinction, so that life had to restart again. But then after the moon, it sort of pulled out and then it got further away. Well, if you look at the science behind that, about the drift of the moon, it doesn't add up. It doesn't add up. Here, let me pull that one up. There's literally so many of these. I'm not reading them all because we don't have enough time. The moon is presently moving away from the Earth at a rate of approximately 4 centimeters per year. The recession rate is not linear. As the moon moves further from the Earth, it recedes slower. Based on the equation that describes the moon's recession rate, scientists can calculate where the moon would have been compared to the Earth at different times in history. For example, 6,000 years ago, the moon would have been 750 feet closer to the Earth than it is today, resulting in a very small impact on the Earth. If, however, the moon has the contemporary age of 4.5 billion years old, there's a significant problem, because 1.55 billion years ago, the moon would have been touching the Earth. It would have been physically impossible, therefore, for the moon to be older than 1.55 billion years old, based on the known recession rate of the moon. In response, those who wish to maintain the contemporary belief in deep time must argue that present recession rates did not hold in the past. In so doing, however, they abandon any uniform thinking that the present is the key to the past, which undergirds every deep time dating technique. There are therefore once again admitting the very evolutionary dating technique is suspect and does not prove an old Earth. So if the moon couldn't possibly be over 1.5 billion years old, that means at our best guess of how things could have happened, that means that impact would have happened at that time scale. So now you're severely cutting off the amount of time that evolution could have happened by a factor of 4. It's 25% the amount of time that they are thinking that it had. That's way less. You had $1, now you have a quarter. Will that quarter still spend as much? It's not enough time. Not enough time for what people calculate. And even with the time frames being, 4.5 billion years, it's still not actually statistically likely that DNA is just going to create itself. And there's no intermediate states. The closest to that would be RNA. But even that itself basically needs DNA in order to do anything. RNA can only interface with cells that are already created. It can't do anything on its own. Even for the most simplest of life forms like viruses, we still don't know how they can actually just form out of nothing. Even with viruses, you don't see the species change. They're still the same kind. You never see a virus become a bacteria, for example, or a bacteria becoming, a jellyfish. J Dude says, do you know anything about Islam? A little bit. Sophia of Athens says, where are you reading that from? Apologetics Press. Yeah, what do you want to know about Islam? It's wrong. Muhammad basically was scared because he talked to a demon, and Khadijah convinced him not to commit suicide and to start a religion in which he conquered people by the sword. He also had very young children as his wives. And The Quran itself supposedly is pre-existing according to Islam. So they believe that the book itself has always existed, apparently. So it's uncreated, just like God is. So I don't know. They have a weird. They don't have a trinity. I guess they have a duality between Allah and the Quran. But suspiciously enough, the Quran was written in Arabic, which is not even the root language. But yeah. Arabic was the original language before all time and creation, according to Muhammad. And yet, the same book that's supposedly incorruptible says that the Bible is correct, but the Bible says that the Quran is wrong. Not explicitly, because Islam came after Christianity, but implicitly, because the Bible says things that make it extremely clear that Jesus is in fact God. And we'd also argue the Trinity. Now, both of these things, by the way, is from the Orthodox Christian faith. You could be sola scriptura, and you could be like Jesse Lee Peterson and being a modern Arianist and say, oh, the Jesus isn't really God. He's just the Son of God. He's just a created thing. Well, that's an age-old heresy, and it's not true. But most Christians believe in the Trinity, and they believe that Jesus is God. It's what makes us a Christian. I would argue the rule of faith is exactly what makes a Christian a Christian. And we also gave the world the canon. You know, the books were selected by the liturgy of Saint Athanasius the Great of Egypt. And it's just kind of weird. It's kind of weird that Protestants will accept the Trinity. They'll accept that Jesus is God. They'll accept our Holy Scripture, but they want to read it their way. I want to read it my way. All right, well, I mean, this is the thinking of evolution, right? Because now we're more evolved. We're more intelligent now. So we can look at the Bible and reinterpret it better than the Holy Fathers did. I mean, can you believe that? The nerve that some people have? It's crazy. It's crazy. J Dude says, it won't let me join your chat. It says the mic and microphone won't work. And J Dude says, after trying to click on it, could you use StreamYard? Yeah, no, I'm not going to buy StreamYard right now for one guest. Sorry if that comes off as rude, but no. Sophia says, J Dude, do you even have a mic? And J Dude says, the mic setting won't work for me. I just tried again. Sigh. Was hoping to chat with this brother in a guest box. Yeah, look, EV Mux is cheaper. StreamYards is way too expensive. I mean, and also it also has its own glitches. People act like StreamYard is so much better. I used to use StreamYard for many years. EV Mux is like a third the price. And you can do even arguably more stuff with it than StreamYard. It has some kinks. I'm not saying it works for every guest, but what I would suggest to you is use Google Chrome. The browser will change things a lot. Some people try to use Safari and it won't work. J Dude says, not at all, brother, no worries. Oh, glory to God. I'm glad you're not offended and that you gave a very kind comment. So I apologize if that came off as hostile. It's just, I don't know. What is it now? 1:30 a.m. I've been talking a lot up here about evolution and the lack of evidence for it. And also young Earth. And there's just way too much to read of all this. I mean, there's no way I could read this all in one stream. I'm just trying to pull out the stuff that people would find interesting. But truth be told, these are kind of books that you kind of just need to dig into. Here, I'll offer this to you guys. The theory of evolution is so closely bound with paleontology and stratigraphy that quite often these disciplines support each other without any external criteria. Sometimes it's extremely difficult to understand. Either the theory of evolution is based on the sequence of fossils fixed in the geological record, or the geological layers are dated on the basis of the evolutionary biostratigraphic timescale. Thus, it is necessary to define what is primary in science and to what it testifies. What does modern stratigraphy tell us? The geologist Sergei Mayan comments, because of the latent gaps, there is a phenomenon of stratigraphical condensation when one layer contains fossils of different stages. Comparison of local scales reveals identical events located in an identical sequence. The events forming different sequences are rejected. Depending on what stratigraphic features we involve in the analysis, we can both find the convertibility and irreversibility in any sequence of events. Numerous cases are known when dating by means of ammonites has led to such contradictions relative to other groups of fossils that they were neglected completely. Similar sins are behind every single large stratigraphic group of organisms. Thus, the paleontological data, as with absolute dating as noted above, are taken into consideration only if they correspond to the theory of biological evolution or the principle of superposition. The data that contradict these criteria are thus ignored. Many creation geologists believe that there is an order to the fossils in the sedimentary sequence, but in contrast to evolutionists, they attribute such distribution of fossils mainly to ecological factors. While opponents have made the accusation that such arguments are unscientific, modern stratigraphy has established that, in the words of Maine, moments of occurrence in the disappearance of taxons in the history of the Earth are essentially imperceptible. In fact, all paleontology established borders cannot therefore be considered as evolutionary. The paleontological substantiation is in fact ecological. In light of all the above, the next conclusion is very logical. It is especially surprising that its union with biology has not prevented stratigraphy from developing. This union is the reason for the chaos in many stratigraphic conclusions, for when the debatable rules of biology has been transferred to stratigraphy, they have usually been transformed into doctrines. We have no right to found the entire methodology of stratigraphy on such a shaky basis as the theory of evolution. This is from a communist scientist who believed in evolution. It is remarkable that these words belong not to a creationist, but to a well-known Russian uniformitarian geologist. Thus, since evolution without stratigraphy is an unscientific fiction, at present it is possible to conclude that the theory of evolution is based on an ideological foundation to an extreme degree. In continuing to develop scientific ideas, the geologists Mayan and Romanovsky go further and recognize the necessity to acknowledge, at a minimum, a right of existence of the creation catastrophic approach in geology. Based on obvious evidence for extremely fast sedimentation and geological history of the Earth, Romanovsky poses a question. Does this mean the revival of the long-forgotten scientific theory of geological catastrophicism? It isn't possible to revive it in its previous form, but in any case, we should recognize that the theory has a reasonable foundation. Professor Mayan expresses his point of view even more categorically. However, it is surprising but necessary to recognize the creation catastrophic doctrine did an absolutely helpful service to stratigraphy. It is difficult to imagine the way of development of stratigraphy if, from the very beginning, it had been based on Darwin's transformism. Thus, conscientious investigation of sedimentary strata leads the researchers to recognize a foundation for a catastrophic history and a young age of the Earth. Despite the fact that neither Mine nor Romanowski reject the uniformitarian doctrine of an old Earth, their particular conclusions contradict their foundational assumptions. Summarizing all the above, it is possible to say, 1. Studies of the velocity of sedimentation and the formation of mineral deposits provide evidence for a very fast deposition of layers. 2. Absolute radioisotopic dating does not give us authentic results. And 3. Old age dating of the Earth and the universe is based on the philosophical assumptions of the concept of evolution. Thus, numerous data on the velocity of the formation of sedimentary strata and mineral deposits indicate the discrepancy between the existing standard geochronological scale and the real results of the study of natural objects. Therefore, not only do we see a distorted picture of the past of our planet, but in being tied to erroneous conclusions about the prevalence in the past of slow geological processes, the science of mineral deposits does not always have adequate models for carrying out its basic tasks. The principles on which the modern stratigraphic scale was created has been shown by experimental research in sedimentology require essential reconsideration. They no longer answer a modern level of geological knowledge and are atavisms introduced from the 17th to 19th centuries. This conclusion follows both from the numerous sedimentological facts as a whole and from the science of mineral deposits in particular. The prevailing long ages geochronological scale is closely connected with the evolutionary hypothesis concerning the origins of the universe, the solar system, and the life and biological variety of our planet. If the time scale is shortened, the hypothesis of evolution will lose a major factor, the millions and billions of years that are so necessary for spontaneous transformations from a molecule of hydrogen up to a man to appear plausible. And this was written by Alexander Lalomov. He has a PhD in geology from the Russian National Institute for Ocean Geology in St. Petersburg, and is director of the Geological Research Laboratory, ARCTUR, in Moscow, Russia. He has authored and co-authored a large number of peer-reviewed papers, which has been published in both secular and creationist scientific journals. He is executive secretary of the Moscow Society for Creation Science, and has served as publisher and senior editor of the Russian language publication Sotvery, or Creation. He also coordinated the making of the Russian language creation video, The Stones Cry Out, Catastrophism in the Geology of Crimea. And here's an icon depicting the harrowing of Hades, showing Adam being delivered from Hades by Christ. That's you and me, brother. That's you and me. So what more is there to say on this topic? Evolution. Is it evil's resolution? I would say it is. I think it's a trick of the devil. It's a trick of our minds trying to understand the world and put it into a framework without God. And again, it leads to so many atrocities in the modern world where we don't have the dignity that we once had. Because either we have totalitarian regimes like the communists that believe we're just a cog in a machine, and these still exist to this day in North Korea and China and other places. And also the capitalist model, that everyone is just an individual, just a consumer. But the Orthodox understanding is that we have to be in a relationship of love, foremost with Jesus Christ, our God, and also with our fellow man, which are destined to become little Christs. So be courageous out there. You know, I'm not saying that you have to start telling everybody that evolution doesn't exist, and that the earth is younger than people think. But be courageous when the world is constantly trying to impose on you these beliefs, these fantasies about how the world could be, when the Bible tells us the exact opposite of what evolution is saying. The Bible tells us we fell from grace and that we're trying to return to God. We're like the prodigal son trying to return to the Father's house because we squandered our inheritance out here. But good news, because God doesn't run out of inheritance and he never stops loving you. Soon as he sees you, he'll run towards you and embrace you. And your repentant heart won't even be able to say the words, "Don't accept me, take me in as a servant. I'm not worthy to be your son." He won't even have it. He'll say, "My son is alive. You were dead, now you're alive." Because in Christ is life. Christ is life. He is resurrection. He is grace. We know God by his attributes, what we call in Orthodoxy his uncreated energies. And that's grace. That's how we can become little Christ. That's how we become adopted as sons of God, so that we can be embraced by our Father, like the prodigal son. And woe to those people out there who are like the brother who disdained the forgiveness of God. We must forgive everybody. And so, before I say anything else, I hope that you forgive me, and I absolutely forgive everybody else that has said anything, I don't know, today or even in the past, that has been rude. We had to love each other. We had to be in harmony. And this isn't a fake harmony. This isn't a kumbaya. We all have different beliefs, but we're just going to get along. We had to see in each other the icon of Christ. Not some ape creature that's evolving into a Superman one day, and we're just the ancestors. God intimately loves you, and that's something worth repeating, because God loves mankind. God loves mankind. Be at peace. God loves mankind. I'll see y'all next time.